Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hangouts and Headlines. It's 2025 now, so it's a brand new year, and I'm hoping to do more of these episodes even more frequently than I was doing towards the end of last year. So, for those of you that don't know Hangouts and Headlines, this is not a legal-oriented show. This is a show about media and media coverage that really came out of a little court case a couple of years back called Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, when I was covering that with some of my friends in the legal YouTube space. And so because this story that we're going to talk about today kind of reminds me of Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, I thought it would be useful to kind of go through some of the things that I saw in the article that the New York Times put up on December 21st before we get into some of the more legal depth of the particular dispute in question here. So if that sounds like fun for you all, please stay here. We're going to do a little bit of a hangout before we get into the substance of the matter. But once we're done with that, we will get into the substance. And if you don't like to wait, you can come back later, and I will try to put in a chapter stop for when the substance of the discussion starts. So with that said, everybody, how's your 2025 going? My Michigan Wolverines beat the Ohio State Buckeyes, beat the Alabama Crimson Tide. My Lions are number one in the NFC. I'm having a good year so far. So how are you all doing? I'll see if I can't highlight some of the comments here, seeing how everybody's doing. Half-Blood Hella says, howdy, happy new year, and then has two clinking glasses, I believe. So thank you. Howdy, happy new year to you too, Half-Blood Hella. I'm excited about doing this video. I think this is actually a very fascinating story. For those of you that don't know me as well, I'm a transactional attorney. I am not an attorney that's focused on defamation. I'm not an attorney focused on celebrity gossip and these kinds of issues. But because I did become so familiar with the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case, I have become quite interested in defamation law, media coverage of things that are maybe more controversial than others. And so I do think that there's a lot to talk about here. And I thought so even when the article went up on the 21st, before everything else that happened over the holiday. Now, I also want to warn folks, if you haven't read the description to this video, that I did want to note that this is only part one of what's likely to be at least a couple of videos on this topic, because I wanted to talk about the New York Times article before I talked about anything else that happened afterwards over the holiday season. So I know that there are some court cases. I know that there's some legal documents out there. We're not going to get to those in this part. We are going to get to those potentially later on, presuming that I actually make a video of that type, which I would like to do at least at this moment. So with that said, Stephanie Wu says, having a good year so far, nothing special, but now comes the boring time without Christmas lights or holidays. Just dark and wet. I feel the same way about January and February, right? You take the lights down, you take some of the decorations down. Winter is not as much fun without that Christmas magic. But we're all going to get through it, even in the dark days of winter. We're going to get to the spring. We're going to continue having fun. 2025 is going to be great. I feel this firmly, and I'm going to continue to say that on this channel and others. So I hope you're having a good year so far. I want to help keep it a good year with hopefully an informative and fun conversation about a topic that I think has really taken the internet, or at least the places I see on the internet, by storm. So, Paige says, hope everyone is well. I hope everyone is well too. We've been through a couple of medical issues at Hoeg House, nothing to do with me, thankfully, this time, but we've survived, and I think we're moving forward. So I hope everybody else is well. Carrie Harvey says, January always seems like it's 149 days long, and then February always seems like 10 days, waiting for spring. Yeah, I think January always feels like a very long month, right? It's interesting that from about December 13th, 14th, and 15th on, it feels like an absolute pipeline, a rocket ship to January 4th, 5th, or 6th. Like, I don't know what happened to those 2 weeks. I know I wasn't working. I wasn't making videos. I wasn't doing a lot of the other stuff that I do during the normal year. But I'm always interested in how fast that feels. Then, yes, how slow January feels and how fast other times of the year feel as well. So I think time really does dilate. It does expand. It does change based on what you're doing. And I'm hopeful that everybody had a fast-feeling holiday, because I think that means it was a restful and a good one. Sandy, I did want to call you out. Thank you so much for gifting so many Hoeg Law memberships today. I hope that people are going to be able to get a lot of good use out of those memberships with a lot of live streams, potentially doing some member streams onward if I can reorganize some aspects of the channel that I want to get to. And so thank you for gifting those memberships. They really do help this channel work, helps make all of this possible. And I'm so thankful to everybody that contributes with super chats, memberships, just comments, likes, whatever it is that you want to do. Every little bit helps get this channel and these videos out there to more people. My goal as ever is not just to help keep a roof over my head, keep my family fed, but also to get good information that can better help folks understand things on the internet and elsewhere, and maybe extinguish some of the outrage mob culture warfare that I see so often on my social media. So if we can help do that together, I think that's going to be a really good thing that we can do in 2025 and beyond. 40 Doherty says, excited to hear your take on this. We've missed you. Well, thank you. I'm excited to give my take on this. I thought this was fascinating really from when I first saw it on December 21st, but I couldn't get myself to make some videos over the holiday period. So thank you for waiting, and I hope it is worth the wait. Ty K says, my birthday and my son's birthday are this month, so I don't mind January too much. I also have a child's birthday this month. We had a great time. It was a lot of fun for everybody. But now we, even in Hoeg House, do enter into a day without celebration too much. Not so much fun for the rest of January. But we are going to have some NFL playoff football. So if that floats your boat, the Lions are going to be there. Ms. VG3 says, Happy New Year. So excited here for H&H. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have you here, Ms. VG3. I hope this is as useful and fun a conversation as I think it could be. Stephanie Who says, so it's wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey, little Doctor Who reference there. It certainly feels that way, doesn't it? Time dilation, it's strange. I woke up seemingly on January 4th or so and said, where did the holiday go? And what is it that I do? How do I do my job? What are the things that keep me going on a daily basis? And how can I get more stamina? Because my energy has been low for the last couple of months. And I'm trying to get it back up to levels that I'm happy with. Weird Sister says, definitely need an Ian Runkle, and Rick talk games. Ian and I have been floating that from time to time. I think the last time that we were really getting it organized and together, I unfortunately wound up in the hospital. But I know that we both want to do that. And it's just a matter of getting our schedules together and me having the capacity on my schedule to do this and Bitcast and Last Stand Media appearances and basically make everybody happy as much as I can. So we want to do that, Weird Sister. It's on the plan. It's on the schedule, but we just have to get our ducks in a row. Sandy says, not sure how I lost my membership, but rejoining to Tide. Yes, I do think YouTube went through a bit of a scrubbing over the last couple of months. This happens from time to time, unfortunately, where people who have been members for a long time of the channel look at their membership status and say, hey, I'm not a member. I'm not subscribed. YouTube has turned off all my buttons for some reason or another. So if you do like this channel, if you like these conversations, we haven't really had any substance just yet on this video. Please do check your subscription status, your member status, whatever status you want to have with respect to this channel, because YouTube sometimes gets a little bit ornery. Lady Draconis says, thank you. Or doesn't say thank you. I'm putting words in her mouth. Yay, glad to see you doing a live. Thank you so much for the super chat, Lady Draconis. That's my thank you to you, not your thank you to me. Carrie Harvey's a new member. Welcome. I know you've been a member before, so welcome back to being a member. Thank you for checking on the YouTube buttons. As I said, Lady Draconis, thank you for gifting 5 Hoeg Law memberships. This is fantastic, folks. I really feel good about this. Thank you all for being here already. I am looking forward to this conversation quite a lot. Even though when I first saw it, I wasn't sure if I was going to do a video because I don't really want to dive too far more deeply into celebrity fights, gossip, and whatnot. I really feel like there's a lot of lawyers and a lot of people that are commenting on these issues that can do an even better job than me. I highly recommend checking out Emily D. Baker if you don't already. I feel like I am tiptoeing into Emily's territory on this stuff, but I think we have a lot of good things to talk about from a media perspective. So, with that said, Carrie Harvey says, my membership dropped off too. YouTube are jerks. I just rejoined. YouTube are jerks. It's a platform. Thank you for hosting me, YouTube. But some of your algorithms, some of your back-end stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to the user like me. And so I do have to recommend for people to check out what it is that they have connections to on YouTube on a fairly frequent basis, certainly more frequent than I think should be necessary. With that said, who wants to talk about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni? or Baldini. I really don't know how to pronounce these people's names for the most part, so please bear with me on that score, because I'm mostly interested in talking about the New York Times here. But even before we do that, see if I can hit the right buttons here still. I want to mention that this is a channel supported by outside funding like Player and Patreon. Those links should be in the description of the video unless I screwed up, in which case I will add them later on. Check those out if you're interested in supporting the channel. Memberships, as you've already seen gifted, are very useful. Super chats, very useful. But honestly, this isn't a grift. This isn't a shakedown. If you just like this content, hang out with us, chat with us, comment, leave up votes, leave down votes, whatever buttons you feel like pressing on YouTube, all of that helps for the channel. So please do that, and let's get started. So this is the New York Times article at issue. It is from December 21st, 2024. It is entitled here as "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine." So just from a media, again, perspective, looking at this title, you can already see some editorializing. You can already see some perhaps bias creep in. At bare minimum, you know what angle this article is going to take right from word one, which honestly isn't the worst thing in the world, because you at least can discount it or enhance your value of it from this very start of reading it. But you can tell they are going to characterize what happens in this article as a smear machine. They're using this quote, "We can bury anyone," to suggest the smear machine aspects of it. And we'll definitely have more on that quote and that discussion in a later episode, because part of what is going to be fought over with respect to this article is whether or not the New York Times did a proper investigation of what they are saying here in order to make these allegations, these accusations against Justin Baldoni and his studio. So the subheadline here is "Private Messages Detail an Alleged Campaign to Tarnish Blake Lively After She Accused Justin Baldoni of Misconduct on the Set of It Ends With Us." Now, if you aren't familiar with any of these names or anybody else or this movie, I don't blame you. Blake Lively is, I think, best known right now as Ryan Reynolds, aka Deadpool's wife. But she was known as a star in, I believe, Gossip Girl. If I get any of this wrong, comments, you can let me know either after the video or right now in live chat. I'm sure you can. But Blake Lively is an actress. The description of this movie on Fandango at Home, I almost called it Voodoo. That would be a trademark file. "It Ends With Us," based on the global phenomenon by Colleen Hoover, tells the empowering story of Lily Bloom. It's a little bit on the nose. Grappling with a painful past, Lily embarks on a new life in Boston, embraces her artistry, and passionately pursues her dream of opening her own flower shop. So this is a book apparently based on a woman named Lily Bloom who opens a flower shop. Now, I know from context and from reading various parts of these articles that this movie and book is also based on domestic violence and issues of domesticity that are going to pop up as part of what Blake Lively was at least getting accused of not being so good at on the press tour. A chance meeting with charming neurosurgeon Ryle Kincaid, Justin Baldoni, sparks an intense connection, but as the two fall deeply in love, Lily begins to see sides of Ryle that remind her of her dangerous father. With the support of her friends and allies, Atlas Corrigan, I can't with these names, guys, and Alyssa Kincaid, Lily must find her own strength to break the pattern, or the pattern will break her. So we know from context clues just in this description, we also know from interviews and the press tour about this movie that it is about domestic friction, if not direct violence, at least implicit violence, and this woman finding her own way in the world and getting around that and hopefully breaking the pattern, or the pattern will break her, right? So we know what kind of movie it is. It's not my kind of movie necessarily, but it's certainly a perfectly palatable kind of movie for folks to like. We see the critics didn't love it, but the audience seemed to like it quite a lot. It's got a 90% audience rating here, at least as shown on Fandango at Home. And that's what we're talking about, is this movie. Justin Baldoni here is listed as an actor. We also know that his studio produced it. He was directing this movie, and it became quite an issue between the various parties about what creative control of this movie actually meant. And that's a part of this story as well. It's not going to come out in the New York Times article so much, but what we're going to do is read through this. We're going to try to understand what they are saying, what they are alleging happened, and then we're going to go and we're going to look at the complaint document that was filed with the state of California by Blake Lively and her representatives to kind of get an understanding of where the New York Times was coming at with this, whether they did an investigation or not. and how that process works. So, without further ado, last summer, as the release of It Ends With Us approached, Justin Baldoni, the director and a star of the film, and Jamie Heath, the lead producer, who is a male for purposes of your understanding of this story, hired a crisis public relations expert. Now, there's really nothing there in that lead line insofar as it's relatively normal for studios to have PR people. Crisis public relations is a different ball of wax, but that's the New York Times kind of characterizing what this public relations expert is doing. We'll see that a lot in this article, a lot of references that characterize things so that you have a better understanding, at least as the New York Times sees it, of what you should be taking from this story. That isn't really eligible for a defamation claim. That's really just kind of molding how you look at the various messages that they put forth here, but that's what we talk about in Hangouts and Headlines, and so I do want to call it out here. During shooting, Blake Lively, the co-star, had complained that the men had repeatedly violated physical boundaries and made sexual and other inappropriate comments to her. Their studio, and note that this pronoun doesn't really have a good connection here, but there is Justin Baldoni and Jamie Heath. Their studio, Wayfarer, agreed to provide a full-time intimacy coordinator, bring in an outside producer, and put other safeguards on set. In a side letter to Ms. Lively's contract signed by Mr. Heath, the studio also agreed not to retaliate against the actress. And retaliation here kind of comes out of nowhere. You don't know exactly what they might retaliate for. I suppose it's based on this first sentence that Blake Lively has made these accusations. We don't know exactly where the New York Times is getting its information from on this particular point just yet. We'll find out more in a little bit. But right now we know that, at least according to the New York Times, Blake Lively has made these complaints about sexual and other inappropriate comments and violations of physical boundaries, and that Baldoni and his producer signed what they call a side letter here, which is a little bit of a term of art for the New York Times to use in an article like this, but essentially another contract that goes alongside the existing contract that requires certain additional things of one party or the other. And we'll see kind of what that looks like as presented in the complaint to California. And we'll also see exactly why the New York Times characterizes it in this way. But by August, the two men who had positioned themselves as feminist allies in the Me Too era, more on that in a second, expressed fears that her allegations would become public and taint them, according to a legal complaint that she filed Friday. Now, realistically, all of this and everything else in this article appears to be from that legal complaint. And we're going to take a look at that, but we have to understand before we do that a legal complaint is a formal-looking document, but it isn't anything that has been proven as it stands as of yet. It is really no more than a set of allegations from one party or another against another party. So legal complaint by itself is standing up like Michael Scott in the office and saying, I declare bankruptcy. This person did this bad thing to me. This other person did this bad thing. We've looked at complaint documents before in Virtual Legality on this channel. We've even looked at them in the context of a complaint filed with the state of California Civil Rights Department in the context of Activision and the harassment claims that were eventually brought against it by the state of California. It claims that their PR effort had an explicit goal to harm Ms. Lively's reputation instead. Now here, this jumps out at me again as a lawyer saying, all right, well, it's not illegal to try to harm somebody's reputation. Although I have a number of questions here because you're saying the movie studio that put the money in to produce this movie decided that they were going to attack their main star, or co-star is listed here in New York Times, although it certainly doesn't look like a co-star when we look at the Fandango pictures, right? The co-star of this movie, you're going to attack her reputation in order to make sure that you don't get harmed because you're bad dudes on set. Okay, that's a possibility. We have to allow for that to be a possible truth. But it doesn't ring explicitly true because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me as someone that is looking at this from a business perspective, looking at this from a movie studio making a movie perspective. Her filing includes excerpts from thousands of pages of text messages and emails that she obtained through a subpoena. All right, we have more questions now, right? Okay, so this isn't a lawsuit. It's important because this has been reported on wrongly in a number of places. This is a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department. It isn't a lawsuit. We're going to look at that process in just a minute. But where the subpoena comes from, exactly how they got additional information, unclear. As it stands right this second. These and other documents were reviewed by the New York Times. You reviewed her complaint, and you're also claiming to have reviewed thousands of pages of text messages. This is important to remember, maybe not for this conversation, but in the future. If the New York Times were accused of not doing its homework on this topic, the fact that they state here in black and white that they reviewed thousands of pages of text messages and emails is perhaps an important fact to remember. There have long been figures behind the scenes shaping public opinion about celebrities through gossip columns, tabloids, and strategic interviews. The documents show an additional playbook for waging a largely undetectable smear campaign in the digital era. While the film about domestic violence was a box office hit, making nearly $350 million worldwide, online criticism of the actress skyrocketed. Now, again, they're telling you a story here, right? The New York Times is telling you a story. They told you all this stuff about the lively accusations. They told you about the fact that they've reviewed the complaint and these text messages. They've now told you that there is some kind of campaign waged against Blake Lively, and the film was a success, but online criticism of the actress skyrocketed. Now, the first thing when we see a sentence like that is that we have to understand, and I think everybody intuitively knows this, is that criticism of a person can exist without a shadow campaign. It can exist without a PR company orchestrating online criticism, right? God knows there is no PR company responsible for criticism that I've received in Virtual Legality, Hangouts and Headlines, or elsewhere from my little YouTube channel. And I'm not Blake Lively. I'm not Ryan Reynolds. I'm not even Justin Baldoni on this score. But no PR company was responsible for getting a bunch of people angry with me on Twitter. And so it doesn't require that for that to happen. But this, based on everything else that they've put in the story already, is designed to make you think that this proves their point, right? Okay, online criticism of the actor skyrocketed, even though the movie was a success. But we know from personal experience, not even in our own lives, but just watching celebrities and interviews elsewhere, that can happen regardless of a movie's success, that an actor or actress can just rub people the wrong way for whatever reason. Now, it's possible that you can have a campaign astroturfed against an actor or actress, and I think it's part of what this story is going to suggest that we have to at least account for. We have to say, yes, that's a possibility, but it's not a guarantee, and that's a part of this story. He wants to feel like she can be buried, a publicist working with the studio and Mr. Baldani wrote in an August 2 message to the crisis management expert, Melissa Nathan. You know we can bury anyone, Ms. Nathan wrote. In the following weeks, Ms. Nathan, whose clients have included Johnny Depp and the rappers Drake and Travis Scott. Now, the New York Times does this. Everybody does this in the media, is using reference points to tell you how you should feel about this person, right? Ms. Nathan is a PR rep, and she represented Johnny Depp, right? So the New York Times has reported on Depp v. Heard, has reported on a lot of Amber Heard's commentary both during and after the fact with respect to that case, and has a specific feeling that it wants you to have regarding whether Johnny Depp and Amber Heard received justice in their case in Virginia. And I don't want to tell you how to feel about that, but I think the New York Times has been pretty clear that it has certain feelings about whether or not justice was served in that case. And it feels like by connecting Ms. Nathan to the name Johnny Depp and rappers, which is its own ball of wax, Drake and Travis Scott, that they want you to know that Ms. Nathan is essentially a hired gun that is willing to sacrifice everything on the altar of saving their deplorable male clients, right? And they went hard at the press, pushing to prevent stories about Mr. Baldani's behavior and reinforce negative ones against Ms. Lively. The text messages show. So this isn't even, they allegedly show. The text messages that we reviewed show that this is happening, that they went hard to the press, pushing to prevent stories about Mr. Baldani's behavior and reinforce negative ones about Mrs. Lively. Jed Wallace, a self-described hired gun, led a digital strategy that included boosting social media posts that could help their cause. An attorney for Wayfarer said in a statement to the Times that the studio, its executives, and public relations representatives did nothing proactive nor retaliated against Ms. Lively. And again, understand that retaliation against Ms. Lively is only an applicable legal term to the extent Ms. Lively made claims against these people in the first instance, right? You can't retaliate against nothing. So Ms. Lively is said to have made these accusations against these folks. She will say something along those lines in her complaint, but a little spoiler alert, it isn't at all clear exactly what those initial complaints look like. And that's probably a problem overall for her claim against this company and Mr. Baldani in particular. These claims are completely false, outrageous, and intentionally salacious with an intent to publicly hurt and rehash a narrative in the media, the lawyer Brian Friedman wrote. saying things as a lawyer usually does, with a lot of extra words, repeating things multiple times, as I do here. Mr. Friedman did not address her allegations about misconduct during the filming by Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath. He alleged that Ms. Lively planted negative and completely fabricated and false stories with media about Mr. Baldani, which he said was another reason why Wayfarer Studios made the decision to hire a crisis professional. So again, if we're looking at things from 30,000 feet, if we're trying to be as objective as possible, we see how the New York Times has framed this. They've said Ms. Lively made this accusation. They said that Baldani and his studio retaliated against her, or at least put forth a PR campaign that might be considered legal retaliation against her. And now they're giving voice to Baldani and Wayfarer's lawyer, but maybe not in an entirely objective way, right? They're framing it as he didn't respond to us. The effort to tarnish Ms. Lively appears to have paid off, is the next line of their article. Within days of the film's release, the negative media coverage and commentary became an unusually high percentage of her online presence, according to a forensic review she sought from a brand marketing consultant. Ms. Lively, who is married to the actor and entrepreneur Ryan Reynolds of Deadpool fame and is close with Taylor Swift, more on that in a minute, experienced the biggest reputational hit of her career. She was branded tone deaf, difficult to work with, a bully. Sales of her new hair care line plummeted. Is Blake Lively set to be canceled? Read a Daily Mail headline, 1 week into the attacks. So they're putting a timeline on this, and we can go look at this very article. DailyMail.com says, is Blake Lively set to be canceled? String of hard-to-watch videos that have surfaced following tone-deaf Q&A to promote It Ends With Us could tarnish 36-year-old star's golden Hollywood image for good. And this is a long article. Daily Mail has its own way of writing things. I never recommend to take it too seriously, but this is referenced in the New York Times piece. I wanted to take a look at it as part of this conversation. The Hollywood superstar, 36, who shot to fame as Serena van der Woodsen in Gossip Girl, is facing a growing backlash against apparently diva-style behavior caught on camera as more and more toe-curling interviews surface from the internet's archives. And this goes on and on and on. But the basic premise is that Blake Lively went out on a press tour to give media coverage to this movie about domestic violence. And the accusation is essentially that she was too lighthearted. Now, I don't view this as particularly strong. Those watching accused the quartet of appearing lighthearted. The four women giggled together as they discussed everything from their dream jobs to their zodiac signs, but there was no mention of domestic violence during their chat. Branded tone deaf, Lively has since faced intense scrutiny, with interviews continuing to surface showing behavior that has been branded mean by some who have seen it. And again, let's take Lively's side for just a minute here. These actors, actresses, everyone else related to movie making often go on these very long press tours. They give hundreds of interviews to various outlets, some of which are more legitimate than others. And there are undoubtedly lots and lots of clips that could, if surfaced, put certain actors or actresses in a bad light. So if there were a smear campaign, if somebody wanted to go and highlight areas in which an actor or actress appears to be in their own bubble, appears to be tone deaf, appears to not be a team player on this score, I have no doubt in my mind that you could, in fact, surface interviews and make that part of your story, right? Social media can do that. But is that what happened here? That's continues to be an open question. This next part of the Daily Mail article talks about a story in which she didn't put on a bracelet that was given to her by a fan because it doesn't go with my outfit, but I will wear it later, and then compares it to another actor who did take the bracelet and put it immediately on. Again, you do appear to be fishing a little bit to make this story happen. And then Blake apparently got married to Ryan Reynolds on a plantation in the U.S., and this was something of a controversy at some point in time. And Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively both had to deal with that at the time. The couple were subsequently criticized for glamorizing a place where slaves once suffered and died. In May 2020, 8 years after the wedding, Ryan and Blake donated $200,000 to the NAACP. In addition to the donation, they issued a statement, which read in part, "We're ashamed that in the past we've allowed ourselves to be uninformed about how deeply rooted systemic racism is." And so you see that they've been navigating certain issues, and I have to give my tilt here. I'm not a fan of Ryan Reynolds. I see him as more of a entrepreneurial businessman than an actor. I don't particularly like his approach to comedy. It comes across as a little smarmy to me. You can love him. That's not going to take away from any of this conversation here if you do. But I come at this from not being a particular fan of his. And that's part of one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this story. With respect to Kate Middleton now from the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail is a British outlet, so Kate Middleton is perhaps a little bit more front and center. They comment on the fact that Blake took Kate Middleton's cancer scare, her privacy situation over the last year, and marketed her Betty Buzz and Betty Booze products with a Photoshop of what Kate Middleton might otherwise be doing, and that this was tone deaf, essentially, again, from Blake. And she might be tone deaf. I don't know her. I don't know Ryan Reynolds in person. Blake finally addressed the domestic violence in her new film, It Ends With Us, this week after fans slammed her tone-deaf and shallow promotion of the drama. Despite the film's serious theme, the promotional tour told an entirely different story as it focused largely on It Ends With Us's flowery romantic elements as well as Lively's creative involvement. Well, it is a character named Lily Bloom that opens a flower shop, so I do get that. Thank you to everyone who came out to see the show. That people want to see films about women and the multitudes we hold. It Ends With Us is a story of the female experience, all the highest highs and lowest lows, and we are so proud of it. Penned the Gossip Girl alum. So this is what the NYT calls a hit piece, describes it happening 1 week into the attacks on Ms. Lively. I do think it's pretty shallow itself, somewhat ironically, since it accuses Blake Lively of being shallow and tone deaf. But I also don't think it's this kind of call to action for people to go on hating Blake Lively necessarily. But again, I might be a little bit immune to the celebrity gossip scene, and you might feel differently about it. Please let me know in the comments if you do. But I wanted to talk about that article because it is referenced prominently here. Mr. Baldani, by contrast to that Daily Mail article, emerged largely unscathed. This month, he was honored at a star-studded event celebrating men who elevate women, combat gender-based violence, and promote gender equality worldwide. And I promised I would get back to this in a minute. But part of the framing in this New York Times article that is interesting is that it frames Mr. Baldani and Wayfarer and Jamie Heath to some extent as Me Too fellow travelers, as male feminists, if you will, that are seeking to elevate women, combat gender-based violence, and promote gender equality worldwide, which has the effect in the current environment of having you come at this from a direction where there's a couple of reasons why you might dislike Mr. Baldani, right? He's treating Blake Lively poorly. That's obviously the most clear one. It's a smear campaign. He's trying to manipulate your understanding of the media. That's another one. And then also, if you have an issue with feminism or you have an issue with male feminists in particular, we're going to add this in to this article to contrast and to create a hypocrisy plot line as part of this story. On Saturday, however, after this article was published, so this is an edited version of the article as it originally appeared, the talent agency William Morris Endeavor stopped representing Mr. Baldani, said Ari Emanuel, chief executive of Endeavor, the agency's parent company. Now, this is important as well because if you're seeking to prove that this article damaged you, if you were, say, Justin Baldoni, this might be something that you could absolutely point to and say, not only did this article damage me, it took away my livelihood. I don't have my agent anymore. I can't get work in the industry in which I chose to pursue my livelihood. And one of the things you have to do when you're trying to make a defamation claim, when you're trying to make a claim that something has otherwise caused an issue for you, is that you have to show damages. We saw that in Depp v. Heard when they trotted out the various Hollywood agents to say exactly what movies were missed and how the contracts were affected, etc. This is that for this particular case. Ms. Lively's complaint against Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, Wayfarer, Steve Sarowitz, a co-founder of the studio, Mr. Wallace, Ms. Nathan, and Jennifer Abel, another public relations executive involved in the campaign, alleges sexual harassment and retaliation, among other claims. The complaint, filed with the California Civil Rights Department, is a precursor to a lawsuit. That's probably pretty accurate. I don't want to say that that's wrong, but it is a possible precursor to a lawsuit, right? It's the kind of thing that you might file to bring on a lawsuit later. It's not a lawsuit in and of itself. We can look at the complaint right now. We see that the New York Times has published it for our review. But one thing to note about this whole process, and the reason why when I was reading this article to begin with, it jumped out at me, is that this is not the same thing as a lawsuit. It is not as publicly known as a lawsuit would be. So one thing I always recommend to folks when we're reading through these articles in Hangouts and Headlines is to think about where the sources are coming from, right? We don't have an understanding of where the New York Times is getting its information necessarily. But when you've got a document like this, when it's filed with the Civil Rights Department of the state of California, when it's not otherwise obviously public, without a fairly Byzantine kind of online interface that you have to go through to even register an account to make your complaint or to find out other information about your complaint as it currently sits, then this starts to look to me like someone told you about the filing. This is not the same case as having a Pacer account and seeing various names pop up as litigants in various jurisdictions. This is something that you probably had to be told about in order to understand it all. And initially in December of last year, what I wanted to talk about with respect to this article was the fact that this seemed pretty clear to me to be a PR campaign of its own, right? That this is Blake Lively and her team totally justifiably leaking this to the New York Times and saying, look what I just filed, and why don't you read it? And why don't you write an article based on what I wrote in my complaint? And the New York Times appears to have been fully willing to do that. But whether or not that is in its own legal category of problem is a talk for another time. So this complaint is filed with California. It is done primarily to get the California Civil Rights Department to do its own investigation and potentially file a lawsuit on its own to essentially utilize the structure and resources of the state to bring in action against these people that you believe did illegal things against you. We saw this in Activision. We saw this in California's harassment claims against Activision. You can check out Virtual Legality in this channel if you'd like to know more about that particular story. But it is not in and of itself a lawsuit. Now, I do want to say, as part of this conversation, that while I have skimmed and gone over the substance of this and other legal documents we'll talk about as potentially part of this video series, I have not read it and highlighted it in detail. So this is going to be a little bit more like a reactions at the time, my initial thoughts as we go through this, then a kind of more fulsome, more complete, kind of organized map through all of these complaints. So on January 4th, 2024, prior to resuming filming of It Ends With Us, the film, following Guild strikes, an all-hands meeting was convened to address the hostile work environment that had nearly derailed production of the film. Now, this is a legal document. This is just that set of allegations that we talked about earlier. This does not have to be fair. In fact, it shouldn't be fair. This is representatives of Blake Lively trying to tell a story, make a case as to why this is something that the state of California should be worried about, something that the New York Times should be worried about, and hopefully get this information out to everybody. So you see here how this document assumes that there is a hostile work environment that had nearly derailed production of the film. It doesn't really establish it. This is why the all-hands meeting was convened. We are asserting it. Attendees of the meeting included Justin Baldoni, who is the co-chairman and co-founder of Wayfarer Studios, as well as the director, executive producer, and actor in the lead role of Ryle Kincaid, Jamie Heath, the chief executive officer of Wayfarer and producer of the film, Ange Giannetti, the film's representative for its distributor, Sony Pictures Entertainment, Alex Sachs, a producer on the film, Todd Black, a producer on the film, and Blake Lively, who played the role of Lily Bloom in the film. Ms. Lively also had the agreed-upon right to have a representative present. She chose her husband, given that the meeting was about repeated sexual harassment and other disturbing behavior by Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath. As discussed in detail below, Ms. Lively was forced to address concerns about Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath's misconduct with them directly, and began doing so months before filming began. The concerns she raised were not only for herself, but for the other female cast and crew, some of whom had also spoken up. The January 4th meeting occurred only after Wayfarer had rebuffed Ms. Lively's efforts repeatedly. And again, these are assertions. These are allegations, right? This is not a detailed listing of the proofs that we have for these particular things that we are saying. But Ms. Lively was forced to address concerns is part of this and began doing so months before filming began. And it's unclear whether that's the recitation of filming, the bringing back of filming after the strike, or initial filming. But it's also unclear exactly what things could have been done to Ms. Lively before filming began in its entirety that she would be so upset about in this context. During the January 4th meeting, the parties discussed in detail the inappropriate conduct that Ms. Lively, her employees, and other cast and crew experienced at the hands of Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath. After the list below was reviewed and discussed in its entirety, all parties present agreed that the outlined conduct would cease. Now, note as part of the storytelling in this allegation that this assumes all parties present agreed that the outlined conduct would cease, that everyone agrees that this conduct happened, that these allegations are effectively true, and that we are not going to do them anymore, that they're not going to happen anymore. This is a matter of some dispute, as we would expect in a case like this one. But it's a long list. No more showing nude videos or images of women. It's pretty fair for a workplace. No more mention of Mr. Baldani or Mr. Heath's previous pornography addiction or Blake Lively's lack of pornography consumption to Blake Lively or other crew members. I am making the assumption here that BL stands for Blake Lively. No more discussions to Blake Lively and or her employees about personal experiences with sex, including as it relates to spouses or others. These are all completely legitimate, but we don't really have an understanding that this list was agreed to by the other parties. No more mention to Blake Lively or her employees of personal times that physical consent was not given. No more descriptions of their own genitalia to Blake Lively. No more jokes or disparaging comments to be made to Blake Lively and or her employees. No more inquiries by Mr. Baldani to Blake Lively's trainer without her knowledge or consent to disclose her weight. No more mention by Mr. Baldani of him speaking to Blake Lively's dead father. No more pressing by Mr. Baldani for Blake Lively to disclose her religious beliefs or unsolicited sharing of his. If Blake Lively and or her infant is exposed to COVID again, Blake Lively must be provided with immediate notice as soon as Wayfarer or any other producers become aware of such exposure without her needing to uncover days later herself. An intimacy coordinator must be present at all times when Blake Lively is on set in scenes with Mr. Baldani. So we have unwarranted sexual references, we have sex jokes, we have an intimacy coordinator request, and we also have this kind of strange COVID reference right in the middle of this list of sex and harassment related materials. But this continues on and on and on. No more personal physical touching of or sexual comments by Mr. Baldani or Mr. Heath to be tolerated by Blake Lively and or any of her employees, as well as any female cast or crew without their express consent. No more improvising of kissing. All intimate touch must be choreographed in advance with Blake Lively and an intimacy coordinator. No biting or sucking of lip without Blake Lively consent. And all intimate on-camera touch and conversations must be in character, not spoken from Mr. Baldani to Blake Lively personally. And again, the implication here is that this has been happening this whole time. Blake Lively to have a representative on set at all times and with a monitor during scenes involving nudity, sexual activity, or violence with Mr. Baldani. All actors participating with Blake Lively in intimate scenes involving her being in any state of nudity or simulated nudity must be classified as active working actors, not friends of the director or producers, and must be pre-approved by Blake Lively. No more filming of any Blake Lively nudity without a fully executed SAG-compliant nudity rider in place. Any such footage already shot without this rider in place and in direct violation of SAG requirements may not be used without Blake Lively and her legal representative's prior written consent. Any scene by Blake Lively or another performer depicting the character of Lily that involves nudity or simulated sex must be conducted strictly in accordance with the above-referenced nudity rider. This all seems fairly normal. An intimacy coordinator must be on set for all scenes involving nudity and or simulated sex and must have a monitor to ensure compliance. But again, the implication is that these normal things were not happening before this list. No monitors to be viewed or accessible on set or remotely during closed set scenes except by Blake Lively approved essential crew and personnel. Now that might be an issue with a director, right? Blake Lively is the star of this movie ostensibly, but is not the director or producer of the film. And these are the kinds of things that can cause an issue with actually producing the movie. No more entering, attempting to enter, interrupting, pressuring, or asking Blake Lively to enter into her trailer or the makeup trailer by Mr. Heath or Mr. Baldani while she is nude for any reason. No more private multi-hour meetings in Blake Lively's trailer with Mr. Baldani crying with no outside Blake Lively appointed representative to monitor. These are the ones where you start to say, did the parties really agree to this list as demonstrative of what actually happened and what was true? Because this doesn't strike me as something that Mr. Baldani or his representatives would agree to in wording, if nothing else. No more pressing by Mr. Baldani to sage any of Blake Lively's employees. Sage as a verb there, probably spray sage, use smoke sage on them. I don't know. I'm not in the entertainment business, folks. Producer Alex Sachs to be given standard rights, inclusion, and authority per her job description and is represented to Blake Lively when signing on. Sony must have an active daily role in overseeing physical production for the remainder of the film to monitor safety for cast and crew, schedule, logistics, problem solving, and creative. Engagement of an experienced producer to supervise the safety of the cast and crew, schedule, logistics, problem solving, and creative for the remainder of the shoot. And then gave some examples, presumably of people that would be Blake Lively approved. Engagement of a Blake Lively approved A-list stunt double to perform Lily in scenes with Mr. Baldani involving YouTube doesn't love that word and or violence. Blake Lively to perform only close-up work or work from a Blake Lively pre-approved shot list in scenes involving sexual violence. No more adding of sex scenes, etc. No more asking or pressuring Blake Lively to cross physical picket lines. No more retaliatory or abusive behavior to Blake Lively for raising concerns or requesting safeguards. An in-person meeting before production resumes with Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, Ms. Sachs, the Sony representative, the new producer, Blake Lively, and Blake Lively's spouse, Ryan Reynolds, to confirm and approve a plan for implementation of the above that will be adhered to for the physical and emotional safety of Blake Lively, her employees, and all of the cast and crew moving forward. Presumably, that's the January 4th meeting. But it also suggests that the January 4th meeting did not create this list. This list was already created and probably by Blake Lively and her team based on the direction of what this list actually says. This meeting was an essential step in a process the parties had agreed to several months before to allow the cast and crew to safely resume production of the film. So subtextually, the allegations are that all those things are happening, and I would agree full-heartedly that to the extent those things were happening, that's a hostile workplace, that's a bad situation, and it's entirely justified to have steps taken to remove that hostility if you want to continue making the film. In mid-November 2023, the parties had agreed in writing to implement a list of protections enumerated in a contract entitled Protections for Return to Production, attached here to as Exhibit A, which included 17 provisions designed to require Wayfarer to cease the on-set behavior of Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath. One of those provisions required an all-hands meeting to confirm and approve a plan for the implementation of certain protections that will be adhered to. After receiving the document, Wayfarer responded that Wayfarer, Sony, and production respectfully acknowledge that Ms. Lively has concerns regarding safety, professionalism, and workplace culture. Although our perspective differs in many aspects, again, even though the first paragraphs didn't suggest this, the parties do not agree that all this happened, at least as described. Ensuring a safe environment for all is paramount. No, it's Sony. Irrespective of differing viewpoints. Regarding your outlined requests, we find most of them not only reasonable, but also essential for the benefit of all parties involved. There's really nothing on that list that strikes as too terribly controversial, except maybe the monitor rules. At the end of the January 4th meeting, having discussed at length the details of concerns that had been expressed by Ms. Lively and others, the parties agreed to implement and follow the protections for return to production to ensure that the film could be completed, marketed, and released safely and successfully. And it was. Production of the film resumed on January 5th and concluded on February 9th. The film has been a resounding success. Leading up to and in connection with the release of the film during the summer of 2024, Ms. Lively and fellow cast members promoted the film in accordance with the marketing plan created and delivered by the film's distributor Sony, which is summarized in the talking points attached here to as Exhibit C. Ms. Lively and other cast members were under a contractual obligation to render promotional services in accordance with the marketing plan. The marketing plan directed the cast to, quote, focus more on Lily's strength and resilience, as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence, and to, quote, avoid talking about this film that makes it feel sad or heavy. It's a story of hope. And you can see already, just based on what we saw in the Daily Mail article, that part of what this complaint is going to be about is I was pilloried, I was attacked for going out there and being too lighthearted, being tone deaf in the Daily Mail's parlance. But the marketing plan that Sony put together had it as a requirement that we avoid talking about it in a dark or depressing way. It's about hope. It should be about strength and resilience and not domestic violence, etc. In the days leading up to the film's release, Mr. Baldani abruptly pivoted away from the film's marketing plan and the types of publicity activities in which he had previously participated. What the public did not know was that Mr. Baldani and his team did so in an effort to explain why many of the film's cast and crew had unfollowed Mr. Baldani on social media and were not appearing with him in public. And this is an important point in this story, but I find it fascinating that multi-million-dollar projects are pivoting and changing the way that they go out there in the media, hiring PR crisis management and otherwise detailing plans to deal with people unfollowing you on Instagram. It's a wild world out there, folks. To that end, he and his team used domestic violence survivor content to protect his public image, as described in further detail below. What the public also did not know was that this was the beginning of a multi-tiered plan that Mr. Baldani and his team described as, quote-unquote, social manipulation, designed to, quote-unquote, destroy Ms. Lively's reputation. That plan was backed by virtually unlimited resources. And again, this allegation is telling a story, right? It's telling the state of California, look, they used the phrase social manipulation. They were trying to destroy my client in retaliation for protecting herself, and they did it with a lot of money. Wayfarer's co-founder, co-chairman, and leading financier is multi-billionaire Steve Sarowitz, who divulged at the film's New York premiere on August 6, 2024, that he was prepared to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Ms. Lively and her family. Note there are no quotes here, so he probably didn't go out there and say, I'm going to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Ms. Lively and her family, but might have said something in that vein. With that backing, Mr. Baldani and his Wayfarer associates embarked on a sophisticated press and digital plan in retaliation for Ms. Lively exercising her legally protected right to speak up about their misconduct on set, with the additional objective of intimidating her and anyone else from revealing in public what actually occurred. On July 31st, 2024, following the recommendation of their publicist, Jennifer Abel, and we'll see how these relationships work, but Ms. Abel is working for Wayfarer at the time. Ms. Nathan, who's another name we'll see in just a minute, is working for an outside group. Wayfarer and Mr. Baldani retained a crisis communication specialist named Melissa Nathan and her company, the Agency Group, PR LLC, TAG. Ms. Nathan delivered a proposal to Mr. Baldani, which included a website to discuss, full Reddit, full social account takedowns, full social crisis team on hand for anything, engage with audience in the right way, start threads of theories, discuss. This is the way to be fully 100% protected. And these were notes about what they might do for their client. Ms. Nathan also proposed the creation of social fan engagement to go back and forth with any negative accounts, helping to change narrative and stay on track. Per Ms. Nathan, all of this will be most importantly untraceable. As Ms. Abel described it, the plan was to engage in social media mitigation and proactive fan posting to counter the negative, as well as social manipulation. And again, they said that social manipulation was used by his team. It's used only in this kind of description here, and it's designed to look particularly bad to the state of California. This is somebody that is doing something that may not be illegal, but it's unethical. It's duplicitous, right? They're using a shadow network of social understandings to hurt this client who was only trying to protect herself in an environment that she needed protection in. And so that's the story that they're telling the state of California. And that's the story that the New York Times is going to run with. We're going to go back to that article for just a minute here before we continue reading the complaint, because the complaint's like 70 pages long, and we don't need to read every word of it. Before we do, though, I do want to capture, we did get a couple of super chats, I think, here, and I want to make sure I don't miss them. I really appreciate the support, everybody. Here's Googleman. I recommend a daily intake of an unnamed greens powder with 75 ingredients plus moderate exercise going for a walk. Not a doctor. I presume that's to increase my energy level. I appreciate it, Googleman. I am certainly trying a number of things, and 2025 is going to be a year where we have more energy, we do more things. I've already been doing a lot of stuff with Last Stand Media. I've already been doing a lot of stuff with Season Gaming and a number of videos here, but I do want to increase that even further. So thank you for the advice, Googleman, and thank you for the super chat. Let's make sure I get everything on the right page here. Before we continue on with our little reading, I can take a breath anyway. All right, so in a statement, Ms. Lively said, "I hope that my legal action helps pull back the curtain on these sinister retaliatory tactics to harm people who speak up about misconduct and help protect others who may be targeted." She also denied that she or any of her representatives planted or spread negative information about Mr. Baldani or Wayfarer. Now, I find this sentence interesting. I also find it repeated in an interesting way at the end of this article, because to me, again, this seems most obviously to be a leak, a kind of directed public relations effort to a sympathetic voice at the New York Times in order to get this information out there, because there isn't a clear pathway that I can see for this complaint as filed with the state of California before a lawsuit, before really any activity, any investigation would have taken place, to go all the way to the New York Times and then to have those text messages be reviewed by the New York Times to the extent that they actually did so, without Blake Lively or a member of her team being involved in sharing of that information. When you think about it that way, yes, she is sharing negative information about Mr. Baldani. Yes, it might be justified. It might be because she was in a horrible work environment and this was all legitimate and all the things she asked for were reasonable and they really did retaliate against her. But right this second, she's using the New York Times to get her message out, and it's a message that is harmful to Mr. Baldani and Wayfarer. In May, several months after the filming wrapped, Mr. Baldani realized that Mr. Reynolds had blocked him on Instagram. "We should have a plan for if she does the same when movie comes out," Mr. Baldani wrote of Ms. Lively in a text exchange that included Ms. Abel, a publicist who has long worked with him and Wayfarer. "Plans make me feel more at ease." Now, again, this article is designed to make you hate Mr. Baldani. That's fine. I don't see anything in this particular exchange that actually leads to a negative understanding. If Ryan Reynolds, who is your star's husband, blocks you on social media, and you think your star might also block you on social media, then that's something that you might want to plan for if you're going out there with a multi-million-dollar movie that you want to have people see. Plans make me feel more at ease. I'm in total agreement with Mr. Baldani on that point, at least. Plans make me feel more at ease. Mr. Baldani, 40, and Mr. Heath, 55, had a lot riding on the film, which is based on a best-selling novel by Colleen Hoover. Mr. Baldani was best known for the CW satirical romantic dramedy Jane the Virgin. Wayfarer provided the resources for bigger ambitions. It was bankrolled by the billionaire Steve Sarowitz, who is co-chair of the studio with Mr. Baldani. They and Mr. Heath, the chief executive, are all deeply involved with the Baha'i, I apologize for the pronunciation there, religious organization, which promotes unity, peace, and gender equality. Mr. Baldani has presented himself as an ally to women, writing books, co-hosting a podcast with Mr. Heath, and giving talks on toxic masculinity, presumably against it and not how to do it. And so you see here that the New York Times is already copying some of the grace notes that we saw in the allegation document, in the complaint filed with the state of California. Now, this appears to be the primary document that they were working off of, so that makes a certain amount of sense, but is also suggestive of a investigational process that was perhaps limited in its scope and was really taking these allegations as effectively truth, right? The New York Times is going out here and saying, this is what happened. This is what occurred. Public, you should know that this is the news. This is everything that's fit to print, etc. Versus a legal allegations document, which is essentially crafting a story for the benefit of their client, which is, again, totally reasonable for a lawyer to do, but maybe isn't what you report on as actually having happened. Ms. Lively, 37, was by far the bigger star. The TV show Gossip Girl catapulted her to early fame, and she appeared in films ranging from The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants to The Town. She built businesses outside the entertainment industry, appeared on the covers of glossy magazines, and amassed more than 45 million Instagram followers. And again, the indicia of success in 2025 is just wild, isn't it? Covers of glossy magazines, yeah, that's pretty old school. 45 million Instagram followers, okay. Ms. Lively had expressed concerns about Mr. Baldani from the beginning, according to her legal complaint. Before shooting began, for example, she objected to sex scenes he wanted to add that she considered gratuitous. In November 2023, as the cast of It Ends With Us was preparing to resume shooting after a months-long writer's strike, Ms. Lively went to Wayfarer with the side letter seeking safeguards. Our client is willing to forego a more formal HR process in favor of everyone returning to work and finishing the film as long as the set is safe moving forward, her legal team wrote to the studio. She detailed her complaints during a meeting with Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, and other producers in January, according to the legal filing, right? And the New York Times puts out its sources from time to time here where you get an understanding of, for the most part, this is an article written on the back of that complaint. She claimed Mr. Baldani had improvised unwanted kissing and discussed his sex life, including encounters in which he said he may not have received consent. Mr. Heath had shown her a video of his wife naked, she said, and he had watched Ms. Lively in her trailer when she was topless and having body makeup removed, despite her asking him to look away. She said that both men repeatedly entered her makeup trailer uninvited while she was undressed, including when she was breastfeeding. In agreeing to the terms that Ms. Lively sought, Wayfarer acknowledged that although our perspective differs in many aspects, ensuring a safe environment for all is paramount, according to her legal complaint. By the spring, Ms. Lively told people she worked with that the men's behavior had improved with the new protections. But she was now in a creative battle with them, and here's where the other shoe drops. With the support of Sony, the film's distributor, she made her own cut of the movie, bringing in editors and a composer, and adding one of Ms. Swift's songs, that's Taylor Swift. In the end, Sony and Wayfarer went with Ms. Lively's cut, and she got a producer credit. So part of this story that the New York Times pretty much buries halfway through the article is that Ms. Lively, at some point, wanted to take creative control of the movie. Now, you can negotiate for creative control as part of your actor's contract if you think that that's something that you want. But generally speaking, like in any given contract or negotiation, if you want something, you have to give up something else. So you might get less salary. You might get it shifted to the back end, making money on the profits that the studio makes rather than on a front end salary. You would do these various things as part of that negotiation. Not asking for creative control and then deciding you want creative control towards the end of the process is a leverage play. And as a business lawyer, I look at this and say, aha, okay, there's the rub. So now there's a motive, if you're Blake Lively, if you're Ryan Reynolds, to go and fabricate a very complicated relationship with the studio and the star in order to arrive at this point in time. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that we have to give credit to Ms. Lively and a possibility of her tale here about essentially floating up videos and having a campaign against her, the details of which we haven't gotten to in its entirety yet. But we also have to acknowledge that when you have creative control over a major motion picture happening and you're leveraging Sony against the studio that was producing the movie, then there is at least motive to create a situation that is fractious because you can go and seek help from the company that's even above Wayfarer And in that case, this is Sony. As the film release neared, Ms. Lively and other cast members informed Sony and Wayfarer that they would not do any appearances alongside Mr. Baldani. So did Ms. Hoover, the author, who had her own dissatisfactions with him and become more upset after he told her about Ms. Lively's allegations, according to text messages from Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath. Most importantly, untraceable, says the New York Times. By the first week of August, Wayfarer and Mr. Baldani had retained Ms. Nathan, who had worked with high-profile clients, including Mr. Depp, whose ex-wife, Amber Heard, accused him of physical abuse. That's true. That's true. You might remember how that turned out in the lawsuit about the defamation of Miss Amber Heard's op-ed. I certainly do. That was a long couple of weeks of my life. But the New York Times isn't so concerned about that. Mr. Depp successfully sued Ms. Heard for defamation, but the trial became a spectacle amid suspicions of an online campaign to damage her credibility. Now, understand in that particular case, as I think you know if you've been here for a while in Virtual Legality or Hangouts and Headlines, that the jury would not have been privy to whatever was happening online, except for the fact that Amber Heard's counsel wound up bringing it up, either accidentally or intentionally, in court. And so was there a suspicious online campaign to damage her credibility? Certainly there was a lot of folks damaging her credibility, probably no more so than her herself. But again, this is where the kind of rubber hits the road, where it gets kind of a perspective type of issue here, which is to say, okay, Blake Lively actually said those things in those interviews. Amber Heard actually said those things in court. Is the fact that people take clips and otherwise propagate them on social media and are not convinced by what somebody's saying or take it negatively against the person that's saying them, is that a campaign? Is that a campaign of hate? Is that a shadow campaign? Is it a smear campaign? It doesn't have to be on its face. It can just be people organically reacting. It's very difficult to tell on these things. But the New York Times is telling you a story, and it's the story that Blake Lively has told the state of California. This year, after a decade at the New York consultancy Hiltzik Strategies, Ms. Nathan started her own firm, Tag PR. Its majority stakeholder is a company run by the entertainment industry executive Scooter Braun. Now, that name's important, right? Again, the New York Times doesn't make these associations lightly. They are trying to tell you a story. They're trying to paint a picture in your head about what this story is about. Scooter Braun should be a name you're familiar with, especially if you're recognizing the references to Taylor Swift throughout the rest of this article. Scooter Braun is most famously known for buying Taylor Swift's older albums, her album masters that required Taylor Swift as a legal maneuver to re-record those as Taylor's versions, and to whom Taylor Swift has a somewhat fractious relationship on her own. Now, I'm not going to go into this too deeply, but you can look at various ways that this has been reported on in various places, and clearly Taylor Swift views Scooter Braun in a very negative light for what he has done and what he bought and everything else. There are some quotes here I think I highlighted. Too many ads, Forbes, you're killing me. But if I didn't highlight it, in June 2019, Braun's Ithaca Holdings acquired Borchetta's Big Machine Records in a massive $300 million deal. Swift's catalog, which included albums Taylor Swift, Fearless, Speak Now, Red, 1989, and Reputation, was believed to be worth about $140 million, Variety reported. The acquisition included Big Machine's client roster, which boasted artists like Thomas Rhett, Sheryl Crow, and Lady A, as well as Swift's first 6 studio albums. Taylor Swift then criticized Scooter, says the purchase of my masters as it was announced to the world. She also labeled him a bully and called him the definition of toxic male privilege in our industry. So again, going back to our story, the reference to Scooter Braun, who has only a tangential relationship to any of this as an owner of an entertainment company that is also a majority stakeholder, an investor in this PR firm, is that you should feel bad about this because Ms. Nathan is a hired gun that is willing to take money and investment from all these toxic males in order to make women's lives harder, right? And that might be true. I don't know Ms. Nathan, but this is a part of what the media does with their stories, and it's important to note this is happening when you read articles like this one. In an initial planning document sent to Wayfarer and Mr. Baldani on August 2nd, Ms. Nathan suggested media talking points, including that Ms. Lively used an imbalance of power to take creative control of the film. The New York Times did establish earlier on that Ms. Lively was by far the bigger star. But Mr. Baldani wanted more. Not in love with the document they sent, he responded in a text exchange that included Ms. Abel and Mr. Heath. Not sure I'm feeling the protection I felt on the call. So what's being framed out here by the New York Times is that Baldani and Wayfarer hired a hitman crisis relationship PR firm in Tag and Ms. Nathan. And then Ms. Nathan had a call prepped a document that said, here are the things that we think we could do. Here are the things that would protect you and that we think would benefit you. And then Mr. Baldani, in a conversation with his own people, Ms. Abel is his own PR guy at Wayfarer, said, I don't think it's enough. We're going to need more protection than just what this document outlines. Ms. Abel then relayed his frustration to Ms. Nathan. I think you guys need to be tough and show the strength of what you guys can do in these scenarios. He wants to feel like she can be buried. Now, importantly here, because the California complaint uses the phrase buried. The New York Times uses the phrase buried. This is Wayfarer's PR person, Ms. Abel, communicating in her words what she thinks her client, Mr. Baldani, wants out of the PR firm that they've hired for this purpose. Ms. Nathan then says, of course, but when we send over documents, we can't send over the work we will or could do because that could get us in a lot of trouble. Ms. Nathan responded, adding, we can't write, we will destroy her. And again, this is a legal kind of concept, is that you don't put in writing the things that could get you in trouble in a courtroom, right? And that's fine. But again, it doesn't mean that they're doing anything illegal or anything worth mentioning in a New York Times article of this type. Moments later, she said, imagine if a document saying all the things that he wants ends up in the wrong hands. You know we can bury anyone, she wrote. 3 days later, Mr. Baldani texted Ms. Abel, flagging a social media thread that accused another celebrity of bullying behavior and had generated 19 million views. This is what we would need, he wrote. And again, this isn't normal client behavior, certainly from a legal perspective, for them to go out there in public and say, this is the kind of press I want. This is the kind of coverage that I want. This is what we would need. Ms. Nathan soon floated proposals to hire contractors to dominate social media through full social account takedowns by starting threads of theories and generally working to change narrative. All of this will be most importantly untraceable, she wrote. Jennifer Abel here in a text picture. I think we need to put the social combat plan into motion. Melissa Nathan, so do I. Within days, the group was working with Mr. Wallace. Now, understand here, Mr. Wallace is a bit of an enigmatic figure. As the New York Times says, he is a somewhat enigmatic figure with very little digital trail. It is clear from this paragraph and further on that the New York Times has basically no idea what Mr. Wallace did. Court records show that his clients have included Paramount Pictures and the YouTube personality Aiden Ross. There's another one of those associations you're not supposed to like. And in a since-deleted LinkedIn profile, Mr. Wallace described himself as a hired gun with a proprietary formula for defining artists and trends. That's why you hired me. And this might be where the New York Times winds up getting in big trouble. More on that on another video. The August 6th premiere brought the first wave of press coverage questioning what had happened during the filming. A Hollywood Reporter story speculated about a rift between Ms. Lively and Mr. Baldani after TikTokers noticed the two stars didn't pose for photographs together and that Ms. Lively and other cast members didn't follow Mr. Baldani on Instagram. The unfollow situation is what everyone is pointing at, says Baldani, seemingly that something is much bigger under the surface, as why would they all unfollow? Tag PR executive, so that's Ms. Nathan's crew, if not hers herself. We've flagged to Jed and his team as well. So Mr. Baldani is concerned about the unfollows happening with respect to the launch of the movie. Ms. Nathan had already been speaking to other journalists, according to text messages. When Ms. Abel wrote to her August 4th that I'm having reckless thoughts of wanting to plant pieces this week of how horrible Blake is to work with, just to get ahead of it, Ms. Nathan replied that she had spoken off the record to an editor at the Daily Mail. She's ready when we are, Ms. Nathan wrote. A flurry of articles followed the Hollywood Reporter piece. Many made it seem as if the only rift was over creative control. Some journalists had gotten wind of complaints about Mr. Baldani's behavior, but none of the most serious ones were published. It's unclear what the New York Times deems to be the most serious ones here, but again, we only have that pre-created list that I read earlier in this video to go on. He doesn't realize how lucky he is right now, Ms. Nathan texted Ms. Abel. In other exchanges, Ms. Nathan claimed that she had kept allegations against him out of stories, writing in one message that major news outlets were standing down on HR complaint. So Ms. Abel, Jennifer, says, so are we in the clear now? Did we survive? And Ms. Nathan, Melissa, says, we survived. All press is so overwhelming, we've confused people. So much mixed messaging, it's actually really funny if you think about it. Meanwhile, an online backlash against Ms. Lively was underway. It is impossible to know how much of the negative publicity was seeded by Ms. Nathan, Mr. Wallace, and their team, and how much they noticed and amplified. I think that's an important sentence, probably earlier on than behind a Hollywood smear campaign, right? On August 10th, Kirsty Flaw, a Norwegian entertainment reporter, uploaded to YouTube a 2016 interview in which Ms. Lively snapped back when Ms. Flaw commented on her baby bump and remained testy for the rest of the conversation. Ms. Flaw titled it, "The Blake Lively Interview That Made Me Want to Quit My Job." and told the Daily Mail that it's time that people behaving badly in Hollywood, or anywhere else for that matter, gets called out for it. After publication of this article, Ms. Flaw on Sunday contacted the Times and said she had not participated in any orchestrated effort to harm Ms. Lively's reputation. In an email, she said that she had resurfaced the 2016 interview independently this past August. It was neither coordinated nor influenced by anyone associated with the alleged campaign, she wrote. Now, I don't have any reason to disbelieve that particular account from Ms. Flaw. I will say, again, on the Lively side of this equation, if there is a smear campaign that's designed to float interviews and things like that, one of the things that can help to benefit a campaign like that in the social media world is that when that starts to trend, when you see people start to click on those kinds of things, when there are Daily Mail and other articles about them, then you might go look in your own archive and see, all right, I interviewed Blake Lively once. Were there any clips that are useful here? Can I put something else on my Twitter, on my TikTok? And so that it becomes kind of a self-operating smear campaign if it indeed existed that way. And you would see it just like this. You'd see the person that went and found it by herself, that yes, she floated it. What's not said here is it was because it was trending, because it would be popular, and I knew it would be when I put it up. But that doesn't mean that I was in coordination. I wasn't signing a contract with Justin Baldoni's people. It wasn't the first time she had posted a video aligned with a client of Ms. Nathan. In 2022, in the midst of Mr. Depp's legal battle with Ms. Heard, Ms. Flaw posted clips of her interviews with the actor tagged Justice for Johnny Depp. Yes, as if it was only her during that period of time tagging things with Justice for Johnny Depp, right? And again, this is the New York Times taking advantage of perhaps a lack of understanding that people have about how social media works and how the world works right now in 2025, which is to say, exactly as I just said, much like shrimp fried rice or anything else, when they report on social media, they don't report on it with a kind of understanding of how these things even happen. So yes, it was another client of Ms. Nathan because Ms. Nathan appears to be a heavy hitter that gets big clients. And not only that, I think that this particular fact, which the New York Times seems to be using to suggest that there probably was some coordination regardless of what she says, is actually indicative of the opposite. She had an experience with getting this popularity, with getting these clicks, with getting whatever it is that she got from posting a video that related to Depp v. Heard when Depp v. Heard was going on. So she was well aware of what the power of that could be and why she would want to do it when she saw this kind of tumult happening with respect to the release of It Ends With Us. So I think it's almost the opposite of what the New York Times suggests here, but it is, again, an important part of a story of how the media tries to steer you in certain directions with what story they are telling. During the film rollout, Ms. Lively was also accused of being insensitive about domestic violence. We saw that in the Daily Mail article. The official promotion plan instructed the cast to focus more on the uplifting aspects of the movie than on abuse and to embrace a floral theme. In several appearances, she never made reference to domestic violence at all, and she faced criticism when her Betty Boo's beverage company was promoting the film, given the role alcohol can play in abusive relationships. Seeing that blowback, the text messages show, Mr. Baldani and his PR team decided instead to highlight survivors of domestic violence in his interviews and social media. And again, that seems like a perfectly reasonable step to take, even though it's being framed in the complaint document, as we already saw, as essentially Blake Lively having her hands tied to this particular tactic of marketing the film, and then Mr. Baldani deciding that he didn't have his hands so equally tied. More criticism came when Ms. Lively said in an interview that Mr. Reynolds, who had no role in the film, had helped rewrite a scene, prompting snarky comments about the actress leaning on her husband and speculating that he had violated the writer's strike. And I don't know the substance of that particular issue. I don't know what people said online about it, but you definitely have to be careful about writing scenes during an active writer's strike. It is unclear exactly how Mr. Wallace operated. There are references in emails to social manipulation and proactive fan posting, and text messages cite efforts to boost and amplify online content that was favorable to Mr. Baldani or critical of Ms. Lively. Now, I will give credit to the New York Times here. It is clear to us reading this that they have no idea what Mr. Wallace did. And that's good that they admit that in so many paragraphs here as part of this article. It's probably not good to include reference to him as a shadow operator who is doing things that we don't know, but had all these bad words attached to it, because it does have this implication that you want us to have without any factual basis that you can speak to at all. And so I don't love that in articles like this one, but I do give them credit for at least admitting that they have no idea what Mr. Wallace did at all. We are crushing it on Reddit, Mr. Wallace told Ms. Nathan, according to a text she sent Ms. Abel on August 9th. The next day, one of Ms. Nathan's employees texted, "We've started to see shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative." Ms. Nathan wrote to Ms. Abel, "And socials are really, really ramping up in his favor. She must be furious. It's actually sad because it just shows you have people really want to hate on women. And undoubtedly, there are bad people who want to hate on all sorts of groups out there. That's true. Throughout the text exchanges, Mr. Baldani encourages the PR team, sometimes flagging social media posts for them to use. On August 15th, he proposes flipping the narrative on a positive story about Ms. Lively and her husband by using their own words against them. Other times, he appears to vacillate, seeking assurances about the tactics being deployed. When he notices a tabloid article critical of Ms. Lively, he sends a worried text. How can we say somehow that we are not doing any of this? It looks like we are trying to take her down. On another occasion, he wondered whether they were deploying fake bot accounts on social media. I can fully confirm we do not have bots, Ms. Nathan wrote, adding that any digital team would be too intelligent to utilize something so obvious. Mr. Wallace's operation, she wrote, is doing something very specific in terms of what they do. I know Jamie and Jed connected on this. Mr. Baldani, Ms. Nathan, and others on the team claimed in their text exchanges that Ms. Lively was using her own public relations team to create bad press about Mr. Baldani, but cited no evidence to support those claims. Interestingly, there isn't exactly a recitation of evidence in the complaint we're going to finish up in just a minute, but the New York Times has no problem with that. They've decided their side of things, even though, as we've just talked about as part of this video, you can 100% read this both directions. You can see this as Lively doing exactly what she's saying here in her complaint, protecting her image, going out there with a complaint to the state of California to prep a lawsuit that will probably be more damaging and really put the evidence out there. Or you can see a company in Baldani and his studio Wayfarer that's flat-footed, had an issue with working with Blake Lively, and then tried to respond with its own PR initiative. And the New York Times is just not giving any credit to any of that, right? It's Blake Lively the entire way. By mid-August, the team was reveling in the damage to Ms. Lively's image. The narrative online is so freaking good, says Abel. But I see this as a total success, as does Justin. You did amazing work. Nathan says narrative is crazy good. So did you. The majority of socials are just so pro-Justin. I don't even agree with half of them. LOL. On August 16th, Ms. Nathan shared the Daily Mail article headlined as Blake Lively set to be canceled, the one we read earlier, with references to hard-to-watch videos and tone-deaf promotional Q&A. Wow, you really outdid yourself with this piece, Ms. Abel responded. That's why you hired me, right? Ms. Nathan replied. I'm the best. Now, if that sounds a little bit cheeky to you, you want to keep that noted as well, because that's going to be a part of this story as it continues on. We men have to step up. A brand marketing consultant, Tara Keat, produced a report in August for Ms. Lively that concluded she had likely been the object of a targeted multi-channel online attack, similar to one against Ms. Heard, and that it was damaging her reputation. Now, I don't know the details of this particular consultant or what report they made. I will say what I have said in other capacities in respect of other trials and other stories, which is to say consultants in general will provide for you what you pay them to provide. And in this particular case, if you want a report that shows that you are being attacked in a non-organic way, chances are they're going to be able to put some stats together that suggest that for you. The report did not identify who was behind the attack, but by analyzing the entirety of Google's search index for Ms. Lively's name, it found that 35% of the results also included a reference to Mr. Baldani, which doesn't seem that unusual given that they were launching a movie at the time. This was highly unusual given the length of her career, the company said, and suggested that the media environment was being manipulated. A separate report by Ms. Lively's hair care company, Blake Brown, concluded that the social media onslaught also had a negative effect on that business. Her product line, which had launched in August with record-breaking sales, estimates that it has lost as much as 78% in sales. Now, again, I don't want to play devil's advocate just for the sake of it, but you launch a product in August with record-breaking sales, those sales go down after the record-breaking launch. Doesn't seem like the most unusual story in the history of the world. Doesn't tie directly, in my eyes, to a social media onslaught, as is suggested here. But also, again, you have to make it an inorganic one to tell the story at all, because if it's just organically people finding Blake Lively's personality to be something that they don't want to be associated with in their hair care products or otherwise, then that's not the kind of story that the New York Times is putting out there. With the recent arrival of It Ends With Us on Netflix, Mr. Baldani has begun another round of promotion and messaging. In an interview on Access Hollywood, he said there is never an excuse to hurt a woman physically or emotionally. He added, we men have to step up and figure out how we can be better allies. And again, the framing of this is that, okay, he's a big hypocrite. Look at all the bad things he's done. But note all of the shadowy language that the New York Times has to use here, that there is even a smear campaign at all. And they have to skip all the front end stuff about what actually happened on set, because it's clear they didn't do a separate investigation and that they're basing it entirely on the list and early paragraphs of the complaint document that we read. So this does not appear to be the most well-investigated story. And that's going to be a part of the long tail of this story, as we will see at the end of this video and perhaps into the future. Now, going back to the complaint itself, On July 31st, 2024, they hired Ms. Nathan. We talked about that. This plan went well beyond standard crisis PR. What is standard crisis PR? What Ms. Nathan proposed included a practice known as astroturfing, which has been defined as the practice of publishing opinions or comments on the internet, in the media, etc., that appear to come from ordinary members of the public, but actually come from a particular company or political group. Now, that comes pretty close to something like false advertising, but it is not false advertising. So it's unclear exactly how that in and of itself makes a legal claim. And one of the things that the Civil Rights Department of the state of California is supposed to do as part of receiving a complaint like this is to analyze whether they have any jurisdiction or any laws to actually enforce on points like this. But that's not the lawyer's problem, right? The lawyer's job is to put together a compelling story for the state of California to be essentially emotionally invested in so that they take up the flag of bringing a lawsuit in this particular case. And I think this document is actually pretty good at that. Do I think it makes a good basis for a New York Times article? I do not, but I think it's a pretty good legal allegations document, and it's important to understand the difference. On August 2nd, 2024, TAG, which remember is Ms. Nathan's PR crisis firm, circulated a scenario planning document to Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, and others, which described preparations and strategies should Ms. Lively and her team make her grievances public, and is attached here too as Exhibit D. We have a bunch of exhibits to get to. We're not going to read every word. To get ahead of this narrative, Ms. Nathan's plan proposed strategies to advance misleading counter-narratives, including pushing Nathan's narrative that Ms. Lively had less than favorable reputation, proposing to explore planting stories about the weaponization of feminism, and misleadingly blaming Ms. Lively for production members' job losses. And then they bring up a picture of a chat recording here. JB, morning, not in love with the document they sent. You saw this quoted in the New York Times article. Not sure I'm feeling the protection I felt on the call. And then in response, this is the first time I've personally gone through scenario planning with them. So I think let's let them discuss the thinking behind the document and the actual process and protocol of how they implement these things. That's the most important part of this, is how quickly they can shut things down and place stories in your favor. Be honest on this call, and let's give real feedback to each point. So that's probably Abel. I don't think it's clear in this picture. That's probably Abel telling her client, Justin Baldoni, that it's fine that the document doesn't meet your needs. Bring up those points. We need to make sure our vendor is doing the services we're hiring them to do. But it's not the end of the world right now. This is an early stage preliminary document process. Justin Baldoni responds, yeah, it just feels very much like there is not much defense, and also them feeling strong like she's going to do something just a bit concerning what everyone had originally thought. So it sounds like Ms. Nathan was at some point in the document trying to prep Baldoni and Wayfarer for the concept that Blake Lively might go loud with all this stuff, and that they didn't think that when they were originally talking. Initially, Mr. Baldoni expressed concerns that TAG's written plan was insufficiently aggressive to protect him. Writing to Mr. Heath and Ms. Abel, he said he was not in love with the document they sent. In response, Mr. Heath attempted to reassure Mr. Baldoni. Okay, so that's not Abel, that's Heath. That's his co-partner. That's the CEO of the studio. In response, Mr. Heath attempted to reassure Mr. Baldoni that they had found the right people for his campaign. The most important part of this is how quickly they can shut things down and place stories in your favor. And again, if it's not retaliation for a legitimate harassment campaign, there's nothing illegal about trying to control media and messaging. And part of this story that I want to get across in Hangouts and Headlines is that this kind of stuff, crisis PR, normal PR adjutants, whatever you want to call them in various places, are doing this all the time. They're doing this on social media. They're doing this on YouTube. They're doing this through bigger places like the New York Times. And part of our job as outside readers is to understand that there are a lot of people with skin in the game, with eggs in the basket, that have a vested interest in how news items are reported across the web, across the world. And so it's important for us to know that this is happening at a certain level, even if it's entirely legitimate, right? Justin Baldoni might be trying to wrestle control of his studio and what was his movie back from what is an overly controlling star in this case. And that's a story that you can tell with a different set of allegations and a different complaint document that we might see in a future video in this series. Later that day, Ms. Abel and Ms. Nathan exchanged the following text messages, expressing that Mr. Baldoni wants to feel like Ms. Lively can be buried. And we saw this again quoted in the New York Times. So even though the New York Times has claimed they reviewed thousands of pages of text messages and all the rest as part of looking into this story that they reported on, everything we've seen so far is directly in this complaint document. It's not some other baseline level of text messages that they could have reviewed separately. It is just this, from Jennifer Abel to Melissa Nathan. You can, of course, do that, but I think he needs to know. I'm going to confidently send you something he's texting me and Jamie on the side just to arm you before this call. I think you guys need to be tough and show the strength of what you guys can do in these scenarios. He wants to feel like she can be buried. And that's, again, Jennifer Abel's language, not Justin Baldoni's. But the notion that I see in this text message that I read in this exchange is he feels you're coming across a little soft. You're going to lose this client if you don't show that you can be stronger. And this is a message in both directions, really, that I've received through back channels and from clients directly when I'm on calls or otherwise talking about legal support. So it makes perfect sense from a PR perspective. Say, yes, I can be more of a hard ass. And getting this from a back channel kind of other person at the company saying this is what he needs to hear from you is not unusual. And then she responds, of course, but when we send over documents, we can't send over the work we will or could do because that could get us in a lot of trouble. We can't write it down to him. We can't write we will destroy her. We will go to this. We will do this. We will do this. We will do this. He has to look at it as an information document for us to be armed with. That's all. Imagine if a document saying all the things that he wants ends up in the wrong hands. Ms. Nathan followed this up by assuring Ms. Abel, we can bury anyone, but I can't write that to him. I will be very tough. A few days later, on August 5th, 2024, Mr. Baldani set the narrative for the social media campaign, sending Ms. Abel a screenshot of a thread on X that accused another female celebrity of bullying women. Mr. Baldani stated, this is what we would need. He wants that kind of traction for whatever articles they wind up getting written. Ms. Abel responded that she had just spoken to Melissa about this, about what we discussed last night for social and digital, focus on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, with reassurance that Ms. Lively would be destroyed and buried. Wayfarer and Mr. Baldani directed Ms. Nathan and her team to actively engage in their retaliatory social manipulation campaign. In the weeks and months that followed, with the direction and approval of Wayfarer and Mr. Baldani, the team engaged in a sophisticated, coordinated, and well-financed retaliation plan. The retaliation campaign relied on more than just publicists and crisis managers spinning stories. They also retained subcontractors, including a Texas-based contractor named Jed Wallace, who weaponized a digital army around the country from New York to Los Angeles to create, seed, and promote content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums. Now, note, this paragraph is very assertive in what Mr. Wallace was doing, and the New York Times was not confident that this is exactly what he was doing. They didn't have any other indicia of what it might actually look like on the ground. So even the New York Times, which is going to get accused of defaming Mr. Baldani in just a minute, was reluctant to just copy this sentence that this is what he did and put it in their article. The Baldani Wayfarer team would then feed pieces of this manufactured content to unwitting reporters, making content go viral in order to influence public opinion and thereby cause an organic pile-on. To safeguard against the rise of Ms. Lively ever revealing the truth about Mr. Baldani, the Baldani Wayfarer team created, planted, amplified, and boosted content designed to eviscerate Ms. Lively's credibility. They engaged in the same techniques to bolster Mr. Baldani's credibility and suppress any negative content about him. On August 10th, the day after release of the film, Ms. Nathan's team reported that they had started to see shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative against Ms. Lively. Now, they bold and italicized to shift the narrative. But again, that's the job of PR, right? That's the job that Nathan was hired to do. That's the job that apparently Wallace was hired to do. This isn't of itself kind of shocking the conscience of the court, shocking the conscience of the lawyer, probably even shocking the conscience of the civil rights department. You have to be able to make the story that I was being harassed, it was an unsafe workplace, and this was only happening because of that. Now, this allegation, this complaint document isn't so interested in connecting those dots because this is designed to sell a narrative. And if they did, in fact, leak it to the New York Times, I think is the most likely way that the New York Times article gets written, then it was designed in part as a public relations exercise to get the New York Times article written as they saw it to be written. Hi, team, says Jennifer Abel. So far, extremely limited pickup on Daily Mail or Page 6. We'll continue to keep an eye out and send pieces as needed, but so far it's been steady coverage on pure speculation. We've also started to see a shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative towards shining a spotlight on Blake and Ryan. Again, we'll continue to send links and screenshots, but wanted to send an update in the meantime. That same day, Ms. Nathan noted that a part of the shift, the majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, bolded and italicized. The majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, says the quote. And again, I don't know why that's an interesting part of this particular story. It is unsurprising to me that a public relations professional is surprised at how fast the snowball gets going publicly and doesn't agree with half of what people are reporting on. There are a lot of people willing to do a lot of legwork for the people that they like or against the people that they don't like. Ms. Nathan then bragged to Ms. Abel that Mr. Baldani doesn't realize how lucky he is right now. by which they were referring to their successful efforts to shut down stories that would have revealed how Mr. Baldoni's behavior included sexual connotations on set had made cast and crew uncomfortable. He doesn't realize how lucky he is right now. The whispering in the ear, the sexual connotations, like Jesus effing Christ, other members feeling uncomfortable watching it. I mean, there is just so much, says Ms. Nathan. Less than 1 week later, they also bragged about how they had shut down stories regarding HR complaints on set. On August 15th, 2024, Melissa Nathan remarked that this went so well, it was genius. So, okay, we have the 4 majors standing down on an HR complaint. And again, this is all describing a fairly typical PR kind of counter campaign. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like me for saying that it's kind of standard. But again, it's only kind of a legally actionable item for the state of California or anyone else to the extent that it is seeking retaliation against someone who is seeking to vindicate their own legal rights to a safe work environment. On August 16th, Ms. Nathan circulated a Daily Mail article entitled "String of Hard-to-Watch Videos" that had surfaced following tone-deaf Q&A to promote It Ends With Us. This was the article that we read earlier. And you see this chat string is important, or it will be on a future video. It says, "Wow" from Jennifer Abel. "You really outdid yourself with this piece. We saw this reference directly in the New York Times article. That's why you hired me, right? I'm the best." And again, very cheeky, strangely cheeky. And that might come up again. As their own words reveal, the purpose of this social manipulation plan was twofold. It aimed to both conceal the pattern of harassment and other misconduct by Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, and Wayfarer, and retaliate against Ms. Lively by battering her image, harming her businesses, and causing her and her family severe emotional harm. But again, part of the story here is that they don't actually establish the existence of that misconduct or harassment or that pattern outside of this list and this meeting on January 4th. And that's fine for the New York Times article. I don't know that it'll be fine for the state of California. Millions of people, including many reporters and influencers who saw these planted stories, social media posts, and other online content, had no idea they were unwitting consumers of a crisis PR, astroturfing, and digital retaliation campaign created and funded by Mr. Baldani and Wayfarer to hurt Ms. Lively. That is precisely the goal of an astroturfing campaign, to light the fire and continue to stoke conversations secretly, blurring the line between authentic and manufactured content and creating viral public takedowns. As laid out in this complaint, the Baldani Wayfarer-led public attack of Ms. Lively was the intended result of a carefully crafted, coordinated, and resourced retaliatory scheme to silence her and others from speaking out about the hostile environment that Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath created. As such, it was not only unconscionable and a breach of contract, but also illegal under both state and federal law. Now, interestingly, the state of California doesn't have jurisdiction over federal law, so that's a little bit of overkill for this document, but not overall. Ms. Lively brings this action to hold Wayfarer and its leaders, Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, and Mr. Sarowitz, accountable for the ongoing retaliation threats and harm they have caused Ms. Lively, other cast and crew, and all of their families. Not the harassment, the retaliation. Factual background: Justin Baldoni and Jamie Heath of Wayfarer engage in inappropriate and unwelcome behavior towards Ms. Lively and others on the set of It Ends With Us. So we're going backwards in time. Mr. Baldoni launched Wayfarer Studios along with Mr. Sarowitz in 2020. Mr. Heath serves as Wayfarer's chief executive officer. Mr. Sarowitz is the leading financier of Wayfarer. Under the Wayfarer banner, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath have many platforms, including the Man Enough podcast, which they co-host. Mr. Baldoni serves not only as co-founder and co-chairman of the studio that financed and ran production on It Ends With Us, he also served as director, executive producer, and co-lead actor, playing the role of Ryle Kincaid. I can't get over these names. I just have to keep saying them. As studio head and director, all actors, crew, and staff on the film, including Ms. Lively, answered to Mr. Baldoni. In his words, he was the leader who sat at the top of the totem pole. While Sony was the distributor releasing the film, Wayfarer was responsible for the production, and Wayfarer was led by Baldoni and Heath. Production began in early 2023 and lasted until it was suspended in June of 2023 during the writer's strike. During that time, Ms. Lively and other cast and crew experienced invasive, unwelcome, unprofessional, and sexually inappropriate behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Because Baldoni and Heath held all leadership positions on the production, they answered to no one and brushed off or ignored the concerns Ms. Lively and others expressed. Mr. Baldoni ignored well-established industry protocols in filming intimate scenes and exploited the lack of controls on set to behave inappropriately. Wayfarer failed to adhere to Guild rules, as well as Ms. Lively's contract, and standard industry safety protocols with respect to nudity and intimate scenes, which the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists acknowledges place performers in uniquely vulnerable situations, right? You don't usually have to deal with nudity in creating your workplace environment, but if you're making a movie that involves such scenes, you have to have some mechanism for dealing with it in a safe and friendly way. Such safeguards ignored by Wayfarer include providing performers with appropriate notice of nudity and simulated sex, and ensuring that consent is given free of pressure or coercion. Signed nudity riders are in place, and safe and secure working conditions that are not detrimental to a performer's health, safety, morals, and career, and use of intimacy coordinators. Without these protections in place, Mr. Baldani improvised physical intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with Ms. Lively, with no intimacy coordinator involved. For instance, Mr. Baldani discreetly bit and sucked on Ms. Lively's lower lip during a scene in which he improvised numerous kisses on each take. Mr. Baldani insisted on shooting the full scene over and over again, well beyond what would have been required on an ordinary set and without advance notice or consent. On another occasion, Mr. Baldani and Ms. Lively were filming a slow dance scene for a montage in which no sound was recorded. Mr. Baldani chose to let the camera roll and have them perform the scene, but did not act in character as Ryle. Instead, he spoke to Ms. Lively out of character as himself. At one point, he leaned forward and slowly dragged his lips from her ear and down her neck as he said, "It smells so good." None of this was remotely in character or based on any dialogue in the script, and nothing needed to be said because, again, there was no sound. Mr. Baldani was caressing Mr. Lively, Ms. Lively, one presumes, with his mouth in a way that had nothing to do with their roles. When Ms. Lively later objected to this behavior, Ms. Baldani's response was, "I'm not even attracted to you." So, yes, none of that sounds good. Those are at least allegations of harassment, potentially unsafe workplace environment. Mr. Baldani inserted improvised gratuitous sexual content and or scenes involving nudity into the film, including for underage character, which really has nothing to do with this in particular, in highly unsettling ways. But again, they're telling a story. They want you to see that Mr. Baldani is essentially a pervert. After Ms. Lively signed on to the movie based on a draft of the script, Mr. Baldani, without Ms. Lively's knowledge or consent, personally added graphic content, including a scene in which Ms. Lively was to orgasm on camera. It's always fun to read these, isn't it? When Ms. Lively objected to these additions, Mr. Baldani insisted he had added them because he was making the film through the female gaze. Although he agreed to remove the scenes, he made a last-ditch attempt to keep one in which the couple orgasmed together on their wedding night, etc., etc. We'll skip some of the details there, folks. Apologies, but we'll have a link to this in the description, or at least in the podcast description. On the day of shooting the scene in which Ms. Lively's character gives birth, Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath suddenly pressured Ms. Lively to simulate full nudity, despite no mention of nudity for the scene in the script, their contract, or in previous creative discussions. Mr. Baldani insisted to Ms. Lively that women give birth naked and that his wife had ripped her clothes off during labor. He claimed it was not normal for women to remain in their hospital gowns while giving birth. Ms. Lively disagreed, but felt forced into a compromise that she would be naked from below the chest down. And again, as described here, the story that Lively and her team are telling, that does sound pretty crazy. When the birth scene was filmed, the set was chaotic, crowded, and utterly lacking in standard industry protections for filming nude scenes, such as choreographing the scene with an intimacy coordinator, having a signed nudity writer, or simply turning off the monitors so the scene was not broadcast to all crew on set. To add insult to injury, Mr. Heath approached Ms. Lively and her assistant on set and started playing a video of a fully nude woman with her legs spread apart. Ms. Lively thought he was showing her pornography and stopped them. Mr. Heath explained that the video was of his wife giving birth. Sounds very weird at bare minimum. Ms. Lively was alarmed and asked Mr. Heath if his wife knew he was sharing the video, to which he replied, "She isn't weird about this stuff," as if Ms. Lively was weird for not welcoming it. Ms. Lively and her assistants excused themselves, stunned that Mr. Heath had showed them a nude video. Mr. Baldani added a detailed scene to the film in which the underage version of Ms. Lively's character, Lily, loses her virginity. And you get the idea on these particular complaints. Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath discussed their personal sexual experiences in previous porn addiction and tried to pressure Ms. Lively to reveal details about her intimate life. And we'll skip most of the details here. Mr. Baldani objectified Ms. Lively and other women by commenting on or criticizing their bodies as sex objects. Mr. Baldani often referred to women in the workplace as sexy. When they expressed discomfort, Mr. Baldani would deflect or try to pass it off, which undermined Ms. Lively and others' concerns. For example, on one occasion that Ms. Lively observed, he told a female cast member that her leather pants looked sexy when she arrived at the set. When she rebuffed his comment because she was uncomfortable rather than apologizing, he brushed it off with, "I can say that because my wife is here today." Ms. Lively felt embarrassed witnessing this kind of commentary, as did others. I don't give legal advice here. I don't know you. You're not my clients that are in chat or otherwise that watch this video later on. But I can say, if you're in a workplace, you're the boss, it's unwise to say someone's leather pants are sexy. Either sex, whatever floats your boat, it's just unwise to do that in that environment. If that is the story as presented, you can understand why it would be reported on to the state of California. On another day, Ms. Lively wore a low-cut dress to facilitate breastfeeding, but had it covered up with a coat. When the jacket briefly popped open at one point to reveal the dress, Mr. Baldani commented about how much he liked her outfit, which flustered Ms. Lively. Later that day, Mr. Baldani pressured Ms. Lively, who was in her pre-approved wardrobe, to remove her coat in front of the crew and multiple background actors in a packed bar. He said he wanted to see her onesie under the coat because it was zipped low to reveal her lace bra. Consistent with past practice, he said, "I think you look sexy," in a tone that made her feel ogled and exposed. With other female cast present, she said, "That's not what I'm going for." He bristled and replied, "I'm sorry, hot." Deeply uncomfortable, Ms. Lively said, "Not that either." Mr. Baldani responded sarcastically, "I guess I missed the HR meeting." And certainly the description of all these bits and pieces of story are of a harassing work environment and a boss that is leering and objectifying. We'll skip to the next one, I think, here. Ms. Lively and others lodged grievances regarding the conduct of Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath, which Wayfarer declines to investigate. As the studio producing the film, Wayfarer was the employer of all the cast and crew and was thus responsible for ensuring workplace safety on set. However, Wayfarer failed to provide Ms. Lively with even rudimentary employment protections, such as an employee handbook, sexual harassment policy, information on or any training on sexual harassment, discrimination, or respectful workplace expectations. Wayfarer also failed to provide Ms. Lively information about the process and procedure for filing human resource complaints. Folks, if you're ever wondering why when you get on to a new job, you have to go through the employee handbook and be onboarded with all of that stuff, that is the lawyers trying to prevent situations like this. Certainly after the fact, with keeping bosses from doing the things that, like those that are described in this complaint, but also to make sure in the first instance that they can say that they've done what a reasonable employer would do in this capacity by having an HR complaint set up, by having an employee handbook, by having trainings on harassment and discrimination. And so lawyers, legal system, we apologize for putting you all through that, but it is necessary for the bad apples that are among us. As the producer and owner of the film, Wayfarer was legally obligated to address HR-related concerns or complaints. To Ms. Lively's knowledge, however, Wayfarer lacked any process for responding to complaints about its leadership, Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath, who plainly were not going to investigate themselves. On May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively told a representative of Sony that she wanted to file an HR complaint about Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath's misconduct. The Sony representative told Ms. Lively that Sony, as the distributor of the film, was not empowered to control Mr. Baldani or Mr. Heath's behavior on set, and that such concerns must be raised with Wayfarer, the studio responsible for the production. Wayfarer, Mr. Baldani, and Mr. Heath received or were aware of a number of HR grievances regarding their conduct. For example, on the first day of filming, while attempting to hug Ms. Lively's employee, Mr. Heath said, "I don't even know if we're allowed to do this. It's day one, and we have an HR report already." And that's clearly making a joke. It's not more than a joke. If the lawyer's standing there in the room, they say, "Don't make that joke." But that's clearly, again, a joking kind of conversation. Additionally, early in the production, another actress made a complaint about Mr. Baldani's comments on her appearance. Mr. Baldani expressly acknowledged her concerns in writing, stating he would adjust accordingly, etc., etc. Despite receiving multiple detailed reports by Ms. Lively and others about Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath's misconduct, Wayfarer failed to investigate those reports. So it's a harassing, unsafe workplace. The parties negotiate a contract writer regarding Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath's conduct on the set of It Ends With Us. On May 2nd, 2023, the Writers Guild of America went on strike, is where this is going to finish up. The film temporarily halted production in June 2023. As a result of picketing, on June 15th, 2023, Wayfarer and Mr. Baldani announced the continued halted production of the film due to the strike and the lost days experience from picketing. While the strike was underway, on July 14th, the American Actors Union, known as SAG-AFTRA, including actors, recording artists, radio personalities, etc., began to strike due to a labor dispute with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. It was a season of tumult. The WGA strike ended on September 27th, 2023, and the SAG-AFTRA strike ended on November 9th, 2023. Before returning to production, Ms. Lively attempted to address and resolve the problems on set and requested that Wayfarer agree to address the conditions described above. On November 9th, 2023, Ms. Lively's attorneys provided Wayfarer's attorneys with a document entitled Protections for Return to Production. That's the Exhibit A that we heard referenced above. And we also heard Wayfarer said, we don't agree with everything, although our perspective differs in many aspects. Ensuring a safe environment is of paramount, irrespective of differing viewpoints. Regarding your outlined requests, we find most of them not only reasonable, but also essential for the benefit of all parties involved. On November 15th, 2023, Wayfarer, through It Ends With Us Movie LLC, agreed to the terms in a contractual rider executed on January 19th, 2024, attached as Exhibit B. So Exhibit A is the protections that they want. It's that first list, or a version of that first list we looked at as incorporated into this complaint. Exhibit B is the actual contract they enter into as a writer. And I also want to mention that the It Ends With Us Movie LLC is a standard kind of approach to isolating liabilities for creative pursuits or real property, if you're in the real if you're in the real estate business, which is to say Wayfarer is the studio that's producing a movie, but it doesn't want the liabilities associated with making It Ends With Us to also attach to anything else that it's making at the same time. So in general, it's often the case that these companies will create sub-companies they own entirely, that they're functioning as essentially the same kind of entity, but to make only one movie or one TV show or one video game or whatever it might be, so that they can isolate the liabilities, potentially spin them off or sell them separately than everything else that they're making. So It Ends With Us Movie LLC is a subsidiary in that vein, it would appear. Among the contract writer's provision, the first provision required an intimacy coordinator must be present at all times when Ms. Lively is on set. The second provision required that with respect to an artist, any and all rehearsal, filming, reviewing of video playback, or dailies and or any other interaction with any scene involving simulated sex, nudity, and or partial nudity shall be restricted to those persons with essential business reasons for being present. The third provision required that there be no spontaneous improvising of any scenes involving intimate sexual, physical touching, simulated sex, etc. And so we can see the writer is putting in place by contract the protections that they sought to have addressed in that earlier list that we looked at. Fourth provision, fifth provision, we'll get to that. 10th provision, there shall be no retaliation of any kind against Ms. Lively for raising concerns about the conduct described in this letter or for these requirements. Any changes in attitude, sarcasm, marginalization, or other negative behavior, either on set or otherwise, including during publicity and promotional work as a result of these requests, is retaliatory and unacceptable and will be met with immediate action. So this is now stating a contractual obligation to say, if you do anything, if you change your attitude, marginalize, or other negative behavior, we will deem that to be retaliation and it will be met with immediate action. That doesn't make it retaliation for purposes of harassment and labor law. It doesn't make it retaliation for what the New York Times is describing, but it would potentially make it a contractual issue for Baldani and for Wayfarer if they engaged in the smear campaign that is described by the New York Times. They just keep summarizing the provisions of the writer. Then they go over the January 4th meeting, which started out our introduction. Production concluded, and Ms. Lively and other cast and crew promoted the film according to the marketing plan. Production of the film resumed on January 5th and concluded on February 9th. In connection with the film's public release, Ms. Lively and the rest of the cast actively promoted the film in accordance with the marketing plan for the film. The marketing plan and related talking points expressly required Ms. Lively, as well as other cast and crew, engaged in promotional activities to, as we talked about, focus on the good, not on the bad. As detailed above, Ms. Lively and fellow cast members promoted the film in accordance with the talking points and marketing plan during appearances on red carpets, interviews, press junkets, fan events, and pop-up experiences leading up to the film's release. So outside of the introduction, again, the story that they're telling here is there was a marketing plan put in place. It maybe wasn't a wise one, but Ms. Lively, our client, followed it to the letter, did all of these things. And then to the extent that any negativity came out of that, because she wasn't focusing on domestic violence, she was focusing on the floral aspect of the story, etc., is not something that she should be attacked for. Mr. Baldani publicly embraced the marketing plan. In early May 2024, he appeared at a floral-themed trailer launch event, which included him personally making flower bouquets for influencers, a photo opportunity, and film-branded latte art. Now, it's really no surprise to me that floral branding was not the winner that they hoped it would be for this movie. But again, I don't know the Instagram, TikTok influencer space as well as Sony or professional PR people might. So maybe they thought it would be a winner. And as it turns out, it wasn't. As late as July 25th, 2024, Mr. Baldani appeared at a pop-up of Lily Bloom's Flower Shop in Century City, California, where he held a long-stem rose microphone and playfully gave tours of the shop to influencers. In a TikTok interview posted that day, Mr. Baldani excitedly walks through the pop-up and states that he will be giving tours all day, every day, until August 9th. In advance of the release of the film, nearly all cast members chose to appear in public separately from Mr. Baldani, given his on-set behavior. Mr. Baldani became concerned that the public would discover that something is much bigger under the surface on information and belief, alluding to the complaints lodged by Ms. Lively and others. And again, unlike the New York Times, which doesn't have to say things like this, they say, okay, so we're going to say he says something is much bigger under the surface. We don't actually know what that's referring to because it doesn't say it in and of itself. But on information and belief, we believe he was referring to all the problems we just talked about above. At that point, Mr. Baldani pivoted away from the film's marketing plan to explain his absence from the rest of the cast. He shifted his focus away from a message of female triumph to instead capitalize on female trauma. And again, I think this is a good document, especially for the state of California, but because this is framing it in a particular way in the story, right? The realistic thing that happened here is he decided that he didn't like this version of events, and he knew that the Ms. Lively was getting in trouble for being so tone deaf on this particular score. Here it's framed as wanting to capitalize on female trauma. I don't know that that's fair. This document doesn't need to be fair. After the film's premiere, Mr. Baldani changed his Instagram profile, canceled lighthearted social media posts, and instructed his team to look for survivors' reactions and support, all in an effort to quickly shift his own public narrative to focus solely on survivors and domestic violence organizations. Ms. Abel cautioned Mr. Baldani that this shift might be too drastic too soon. Still, Mr. Baldani insisted on a TikTok strategy and that his promotional activities for the film should seek to amplify what he described as survivor content. Hey, just landed, says Justin Baldoni. What is the TikTok strategy? I'd like you guys to start posting me only talking about domestic violence and clips and why this movie is so important. The team followed Mr. Baldani's instruction. For her part, Ms. Abel concluded, it doesn't feel performative now that you've done major substantial press on the topic. On August 11th, 2024, Ms. Abel laid out a posting timeline to Mr. Baldani and the team stating, theater surprise, and then I think survivor content first thing tomorrow, AM, which then will be helpful for the news cycle. By repositioning Mr. Baldani's marketing of the film on information and belief, Mr. Baldani hoped to create the false impression that he had chosen not to appear alongside other cast members. Mr. Baldani directed his team to share on his public Instagram feed the private messages he had received from survivors sharing their stories of domestic violence with him. Mr. Baldani's team talked him out of the idea, writing that they do not recommend using private DMs as content. Yes, that's a party foul, folks. I always hate it when even people in my sphere wind up sharing private DMs, at least without the consent of the other party, because those are intended to be private communications, especially when you're talking about things like domestic violence survivors. But again, this is a story being told to the state of California. It's a story being told to the New York Times and eventually to you. And the fact that he is reframing why people aren't appearing with him is not indicative of a retaliation campaign. It's not indicative of even really falsehood as much as it's kind of standard PR strategy. Now, is he a pervert? Is he on set doing all the bad things that he's accused of? If he is, then that could be a potential problem for him. That's certainly not a good look. And I wouldn't want to work with him in that particular case. But is this part of the story, the retaliation, the smear campaign that the New York Times ran with, is this really what's happening here? Or is he just looking for a different direction to market this particular movie? Mr. Baldani went so far as proposing to share a video of a woman's birth moment, but his team talked him out of it, warning that it might be perceived as weird and was too intimate. Still, Mr. Baldani's team was more than willing to deploy survivor stories, reactions, and images to protect Mr. Baldani's image. They form a retaliatory plan. Wayfarer knew the details of Ms. Lively's and others' concerns, the HR complaints raised regarding Mr. Baldani and Mr. Heath's behavior, Mr. Lively's contractual writer, and the January 4th, 2024 meeting to discuss their behavior. In addition, Wayfarer's PR team knew about the claims by Ms. Lively and others, as well as the protections writer, as Wayfarer sent the materials to them in November 2023. As early as May 2024, Mr. Baldani told his team that they needed a plan to get ahead of the claims against him in the event that they were going to go public. Just want you guys to have a plan. Plans make me feel more at ease. And this is an area where the New York Times felt that this quote was important. And again, it's in the complaint in its entirety, not on a separate document the New York Times might have looked at. On May 17th, 2024, Mr. Baldani texted his publicist, Jennifer Abel, that Ms. Lively's husband had blocked him on social media, stating we should have a plan for if she does the same when the movie comes out. In June 2024, a month after Mr. Baldani's first promotional event for the film, Ms. Lively and others in the cast fulfilled their first publicity obligation for the film without Mr. Baldani. They did not publicly discuss the misconduct that had occurred on set, nor did they ever suggest to Wayfarer or Mr. Baldani that they intended to discuss their concerns publicly. Yet on June 20th, 2024, Ms. Abel texted Mr. Heath her concern, we can't have fans starting to guess why JB is left out of this stuff. Likewise, Mr. Baldani strategized with his publicist, Ms. Abel, about various ways in which they might cover up or explain away his on-set misconduct. And again, remember the end of the New York Times article. This is a case where Blake Lively and her representatives are going to take creative control of this movie and essentially take the cutting rights away from Mr. Baldani. So that's a part of this story as well. And here's, again, another text message that they use as part of their complaint. The same day, Ms. Abel reviewed again the agreed-upon list of protections that formed the basis for the contractual writer. On July 24th, 2024, Ms. Abel emailed Mr. Heath and others requesting the legal letter that was sent to Ms. Lively and her team, stating, per our conversation, we will go through point by point and draft context surrounding each situation. We can then flag what we are missing that would be helpful to arm us in the case we need to refute any of the claims. And again, highlighted for evilness, right? Highlighted for mustache twirling, but this is standard PR. On July 26, 2024, Mr. Baldani sent Ms. Abel a Variety article about Francis Ford Coppola's inappropriate behavior on set during production of his movie Megalopolis, including his alleged kissing of cast and crew. In conveying the article, Mr. Baldani stated, "This is the shit that I'm sure they want to do. Unnamed sources, etc." Second, unnamed sources are certainly something that we've talked about in Hangouts and Headlines quite a bit. On July 29, 2024, Mr. Baldani and Ms. Abel discussed a proposal to get ahead of any potential publicity regarding Ms. Lively's HR complaints against him with a social and digital combat plan. Wayfarer engages Melissa Nathan and the agency group on behalf of Mr. Baldani to launch a retaliation campaign against Ms. Lively. And this is where the New York Times really takes up their article from. As the film's release date of August 9th, 2024 drew closer, Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, Wayfarer, Ms. Abel, and others continue to pursue a strategy on behalf of Mr. Baldani and Wayfarer to arm themselves against the possibility that Ms. Lively or others might go public with their claims against Mr. Baldani or Wayfarer. The plan took shape with Wayfarer's retention of Melissa Nathan, which occurred on or around July 31st, 2024. Melissa Nathan is a crisis manager. On or about June 20th, 2024, she launched the agency group, PR, TAG. So might have been her first client under that name. Unclear. TAG markets itself as a team of crisis specialists and communications experts that redefines the rules of reputation management. TAG's website states at TAG, it's more than just creating a powerful narrative. It's knowing how to navigate that narrative towards continued success and a lasting legacy. And again, PR, not in and of itself illegal, might have a contractual breach insofar as it might be retaliation as defined in that contract writer, but not in and of itself necessarily illegal if they can't make the case that harassment actually occurred. So part of the process that the state of California enters into as part of a complaint like this is that they decide whether or not what's alleged would be sufficient, if true, to form a legal problem as defined by California law. And if it would, then they use their resources to go and investigate things. They go and find text messages and emails and go talk to people and interview folks that actually worked on set during these times to verify to the best of their ability what actually happened before they launch a lawsuit. Now, reasonable minds can differ as to whether they're always correct in that. Nobody's ever always correct on anything. And we had our own concerns about the document that actually went forward from the state of California against Activision that we talked about in virtual legality. But that's the process here. So one of the things that this is designed to do is say, okay, California, go investigate what we just claimed about whispers and lip biting and everything else and the stuff that Rick skipped. And when you find out that that's true, you can read the rest of this and understand better what we're talking about. But the state of California, at least as we know right now, hasn't taken up that banner yet. They have a process that they get to evaluate whether a complaint is legitimate, whether it's something that they can actually pursue as a legal action, and then pursue as an investigation. Now, we don't know where the text messages came from. We don't know where some of the stuff came from. We saw the New York Times refer to a subpoena. That doesn't make a ton of sense in this context. But we also don't know that the state of California has moved forward with an investigation or proceeding to potentially make a lawsuit out of this as it stands right this second. By July 31st, 2024, Wayfarer had started to put together a timeline of events to be shared with Ms. Nathan and TAG. Here we get into some of the stuff that New York Times reported. Next day, even though Ms. Nathan and TAG had already begun performing work on behalf of Wayfarer, Ms. Nathan texted a text chain with Ms. Abel and Mr. Heath, providing pricing quotes ranging from $75,000 to $175,000 for TAG's crisis mitigation services. Quote one, $175,000 would be for 3 or 4 months and include a website, all the other stuff that we saw referenced earlier on in this document. For $25,000 per month, a minimum of 3 months, same as above, but also social fan engagement to go back and forth with negative accounts, helping to change narrative and stay on track. And you see all that in this big quote here. Hollywood Reporter announced the retention of Ms. Nathan and TAG on August 13th, 2024. That report stated, in part, the news comes days after sleuths flooded TikTok with speculation about an alleged rift between Baldani and his cast and crew, including co-star and producer Blake Lively, as well as Hoover. Chatter spiked when fans noticed Baldani's absence from joint press events and the lack of group photos of Lively and Baldani together at the New York premiere August 6th. Some also pointed out that neither Lively or Hoover nor the rest of the cast follow Baldani on Instagram, though he follows them. Here's the retaliation scheme, as quoted in this complaint. Ms. Abel, Ms. Nathan, and others employed or engaged by TAG perpetrated a retaliation scheme against Ms. Lively in collusion with Mr. Baldani, Mr. Heath, and Wayfarer. This scheme was what TAG described as a social manipulation plan relying on direct and constant media engagement, the seeding of content on traditional and social media platforms, the boosting of content, sometimes the very content that TAG and its affiliates had seeded, the suppressing of negative content about Mr. Baldani, and the amplifying of negative content about Ms. Lively. Now, from the positive side of things, the suppressing of negative content about Mr. Baldani, the approval of positive content about Baldani or Wayfarer or the movie, those would all be really without question fine. The amplifying of negative content about Ms. Lively would be the problem. That would be retaliation under the contract term that we saw at least as quoted in this complaint, and that's where an issue might arise. On August 1st, 2024, before any of the cast sat down for interviews at the film's press junkets, Ms. Abel stated to Mr. Heath and Wayfarer personnel that she had held an in-person meeting with a contributor to People, Fox News, In Touch, and Us Weekly. Ms. Abel explained that during the meeting, she had fully briefed the contributor of the situation with Ms. Lively. Ms. Abel stated that the contributor was armed and ready to take this story of Blake weaponizing feminism and assured Mr. Heath that the contributor will do anything for us. So their PR person, their internal one, Ms. Abel, says that we can plant some stories about Blake Lively weaponizing feminism, being a bad actor. And again, that's a potential problem for that contract term we saw referenced above. On or around August 2nd, 2024, Ms. Abel connected the contributor with Ms. Nathan. Subsequently, Ms. Nathan engaged directly with media sources on behalf of Mr. Baldani and Wayfarer regarding Mr. Baldani, Ms. Lively, and the film. And this is just a timeline of what they say actually happened as part of this campaign. Of note, the scenario planning document states, etc. We already read that. Upon review of the scenario planning document, Mr. Baldani informed Mr. Heath that he was not in love with it. We know that. We know all of this stuff about the conflict, about whether the document was enough, and Abel telling Nathan that she needed to be stronger, essentially. On August 4th, Ms. Abel texted Ms. Nathan stating, "I'm having reckless thoughts of wanting to plant pieces this week of how horrible Blake is to work with just to get ahead of it. She's putting us through hell." Again, quoted by the New York Times. Ms. Nathan responded same and indicated that she had already spoken to the Daily Mail. Same. Am I already off the records? Spoke to the editor of Daily Mail because she's my friend. She's ready when we are. Ms. Abel and Ms. Nathan viewed and referred to their shared work on behalf of Ms. Baldani and Wayfarer as a social combat plan. I think we really need to put the social combat plan into motion. So do I. Same day, Ms. Abel corresponded with TAG personnel regarding her discussion with Ms. Nathan regarding social manipulation, which she described as distinct from social media mitigation and proactive fan posting to counter the narrative. Fair amount of more timeline information here. Stuff that we've already seen quoted in the New York Times. And we'll see if we can go on from here. Well, we'll take a beat here as we pause. If you have questions, let me know in the chat. If you have comments about what's happening here, I am very interested to hear them. Like I said, this is a story that I find fascinating because it really is going to come down to a PR battle here. And basically either side has a story that they can tell that is pretty convincing and compelling. Obviously, both can't be true. And that's part of why I wanted to bring it up in Hangouts and Headlines, is that as readers of these things, as people that aren't in the room, that can't speak to the facts directly, we have to take into account that each side has their own motivations and reasons for bringing stories like these when we see them in places like the New York Times or even in a complaint document like the one we're reading right now. Or as Melissa Jane says, the amount of people who have fallen for this smear campaign and Baldani's pathetic excuse for a lawsuit, spoiler alert, we're not getting to that one yet, Melissa, is wild. That is why the world is doomed, because the majority of people have turned stupid. Well, again, I do think that either side of this looks like a story that could have happened. And I think that's important for people to take away from discussing all of these things, because I think Blake Lively can frame a story here that makes a certain amount of sense. A skis ball on set, decided to get the movie done with the writer, didn't listen to everything there. Nobody wanted to work with him anymore. Nobody wanted to be with him anymore. Nobody wanted to be at press events with him. And then he hired a PR firm to essentially highlight videos that showed her maybe in not the best light. And that got taken into a snowball and made a very negative impression for her. I think is a story that you can tell. It's a story that does strike me as potentially true. And on the other side of the coin, which will be a second video in this series, is a story of defamation in the New York Times that isn't doing what it needs to do to even verify the facts that are in a complaint like this one. And that's also, I think, something that rings true to me, having looked at these issues before, having sat in and listened to Depp v. Heard, having looked at how Depp v. Heard was reported on even the day of the court case. And I think that's what makes this so fascinating to me and why I wanted to bring it up in this space. Carrie Harvey says, this seems like it's going to be a good case about nuance. It can be true that she tried to take over the project and that he behaved badly, and Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively tried to bury him, or vice versa. Lots going on. That's what attracted me to this, honestly, Carrie Harvey. I am not a sucker for celebrity gossip. Honestly, I got into Depp v. Heard almost by accident because I was helping Alita out with her panel over at Legal Bites when it started to cover Depp v. Heard, and then wound up being on the whole broadcast because I was interested in how it was going to turn out, and I was interested in how defamation cases wound up being adjudicated in places like Virginia. And so I think this story is fascinating. I honestly think it has the possibility of having more of an impact, more interesting beats even than Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Obviously not the same level of celebrity there, so I don't think it'll have that same kind of zeitgeist effect. But I wanted to talk to you all about it because I think there is nuance, and I think reasonable people can look at both sides and probably be informed by their own tilts and biases, undoubtedly, because I don't think we have enough factual information on the ground to tell which side or the other is playing the other side. Thank you, Carrie, for the comment. I really appreciate it. Beach Rando says, I like Hoeg's analysis. Some YouTubers are so biased, I suspect both have issues. In this particular case, I think there's probably some legitimacy on both sides. I do think it's a possibility that it's not entirely fabricated, but perhaps highlighted and hyperbolized in order for Lively Reynolds to take control of the cut of the film. And that's not the worst crime in the world, certainly. It's maybe an artistic crime, and it might hurt Justin Baldoni's feelings at the end of the day. But I do think that you can craft a story pretty easily that says this is what the game was, this is what they were trying to achieve, and that's ultimately what happened. So it's easy to look at in reverse and say that's what they were aimed at. But I can't speak to that on a truthfulness level. I can just highlight that there is a way that you can see that that's what happened, just as easily as you can see that it's exactly what is presented here in this document. And this is just, again, Michael Scott shouting, I declare bankruptcy. This is just Blake Lively and her team saying this is what happened. That's all this document is. It's just words on a page. But if this is as presented, happened as true, then obviously it's a very unhappy work environment. It's a very unsafe work environment. You can understand why somebody would react very negatively to it. But there is that motivation potentially of seizing control, getting in better with Sony potentially. And we do know Ryan Reynolds, again, a person that I don't like from at least the outside in, and Blake Lively have an incentive not just to seize creative control of this, but also potentially to make inroads with a giant financier distributor like Sony. And so there's a whole lot going on here. It's very difficult for us to piece out on the outside. The one thing I would say, as I say here in Virtual Legality and other places, reasonable minds can differ on this. Honestly, the best thing you can do when discussing topics like this online is that a lot of people are going to have a lot of strong feelings, and to remember that there is that honest pathway, a good faith belief can exist on really both sides of the equation here. And that the better conversation is going to happen when people talk about that nuance, talk about that detail, and don't dehumanize and don't just treat other people as stupid or silly for thinking one way or the other. Gamer Ducko, which I love as a name, thank you, says, oof, Hoeg, don't say not the same level of celebrity. The people involved won't appreciate that. I'm sure they won't. Ryan Reynolds, you're not the same level of celebrity as Johnny Depp. I appreciate your Deadpool, not as much as others, but I appreciate your Deadpool. Blake Lively, you're not the same level of celebrity as Amber Heard, I don't think. But I can appreciate that celebrities want to be as maximally celebrity as they can be. So, yes, Blake Lively, I knew your name before this happened, so that's good for you. I didn't know who Justin Baldoni was. I still don't feel like I know who he is after reading all these documents or reading the secondary documents that we're not going to get to today. But fair enough, Gamer Ducko. That is fair. I don't think Blake Lively is likely to watch this video, but if she does, I apologize if you take any offense to my characterization of your level of celebrity. Beatrando says, more coming with PR teams also trying to bury each other. Juicy backstory. Oh, yeah. I think there's no question that this is a PR war, right? And part of the job of PR is to put flak cannons up in the sky, right? Is to make it unclear what the truth is to some level, right? And if you put enough noise up there, it's going to get very confusing for people very fast. And that's not great for humanity. That's not great for our understanding in places like this, but that's the job. And so part of what I want to comment on in this complaint is they're trying to frame this as evil and shady and mustache twirling, etc. But honestly, that's what Ms. Nathan, who is the main kind of evil actor as described in this complaint in the New York Times story, is hired to do. That's why she can quote $175,000 to do it. is that she has the skills, presumably, to get this done and to go out there and make this happen. But we, who are not PR flunkies, who are not celebrities ourselves, I don't think, if there's a celebrity in the chat, let me know, have the job of going out there with clear eyes as best we can and saying, okay, there are reasons why this story is placed in the New York Times. There are reasons this story appears in the Washington Post or wherever else we read it. There are reasons why this is happening. There are people that are incentivized to get it out there. And so that's a part of this story as well. And to at least go in and say, why might this be happening? Why is this article in the New York Times? And even on December 21st, my initial reaction was, this looks like it was leaked from Blake Lively's team immediately. And I hadn't read the complaint yet. I didn't know how closely the New York Times reporting mirrors even the order of what appears in this complaint document. But that was my gut reaction initially. I can't prove that. I can't sit here and promise you that the New York Times was leaked this material from Blake Lively's team. But it certainly seems to be the case that they found a friendly author at the New York Times and said, this is a complaint we're filing with the state of California. You might be interested in reporting on it, and wave their hands and say, I don't know, do what you will. And the New York Times reporter said, yeah, you know what? That might make a good article. And they went out with it on December 21st, 2024. Now, worth noting as part of that story is that Megan Twohey, who is seemingly the lead reporter here, certainly the first one referenced on this story, is their Me Too movement reporter. She claims that she helped ignite the Me Too movement and shared a Pulitzer Prize for public service by co-writing the book She Said, which takes readers behind the scenes of our Weinstein investigation and was adapted into a film. It offers a pretty good glimpse into who I am and how I do my job, which is nothing against her, right? That makes all the sense in the world. That was a very big set of articles and things that happened. But if you were Blake Lively's team, if you were PR on that side of the equation and you were saying, all right, who's going to be interested in this complaint? Where can I possibly place a story that's going to be written almost instantaneously? This is who you might go to ask that question, especially if you have a connection with them already. And I don't know that they did. But when you look at an article, you can look at who the people are that actually wrote it. You can find out where their background is, what direction they come at these stories from. New York Times does a very good job to give them credit of kind of articulating all these and what their beat is, what their background is, what their tilt on ethics is, etc. And you can always find these things out in those articles. And that's part of this story, right? It's a sympathetic author. It's a sympathetic outlet in the New York Times. And that's all part of this story as much as the complaint itself is. So let's finish off with the complaint. I don't think there's any other complaints, any other comments that I wanted to flag here before we started. Gwen Mendez agrees that it's 100% the New York Times collaborating with Blake's team. I tend to agree there, obviously. Ryan Reynolds yells at Justin for fat shaming and not sexual harassment. How does that sound, Blake? I think part of this story that's really interesting is that the sexual harassment aspect, which is fully necessary for there to be retaliation or even the writer kind of concept at all, is not so heavily discussed. Even in the parts that we read through, and I kind of skipped through some of, it's not the focus of this particular document. It's certainly not the focus of the New York Times writing. And yeah, you would think that the bigger issue for the Ryan Reynoldses of the world would be everything else that we discussed that I didn't want to really talk about too much as part of this video, because yeah, that's awful as described. But for the most part, we really only have their claims. It's really fully the she said aspect of this. This is only an allegation document. This is only a complaint. So they really don't have a lot of evidence at this moment in time to justify that description of events, but we can't say that it's wrong either. So worth noting. All right. Let's get back into this document. On August 9th, 2024, Ms. Abel circulated a screenshot of a post by a woman stating Justin, the creator of a show called My Last Days, exploits the struggles of individuals facing terminal illness for his own gain. He found my friend who is battling a serious illness and followed her life closely. Despite her grace in not speaking ill of him, I sensed from the start that something was deeply wrong. Justin weaponizes therapeutic language, presenting himself as thoughtful and supportive, yet his actions reveal a very different reality. He portrays himself as an ally to women and the vulnerable, but it's all a facade. And much like the New York Times in their writing on this particular point brings up, I do think this is another aspect, again, of the story that is somewhat brilliant in the way that the PR from Blake Lively's team has positioned this story, which is to say, you can't defend Justin Baldoni because you're a misogynist hater of women, and you can't defend Justin Baldoni because you are a feminist and pro everything that he stands for. He's bad in both respects. the idea of a document like this and putting these things out there as part of this story is to say everybody can equally hate Justin Baldoni. In response to the article, Ms. Abel stated, "I'm assuming that this is not true in the slightest. Either way, we've flagged to Jed and his team for more serious action on the social side." And they're handling these various articles that go out. On any occasion, any member of Wayfarer or the social manipulation team could text the link to a positive story about Mr. Baldoni or a negative story about Ms. Lively and ask that someone boost the story to the public or engage in the comments to fuel the desired narrative. It's really what influencing is, right? Further, on or around August 14th, media outlets directly inquired about HR complaints made on set because they were being told that there were at least 3 HR complaints filed against Justin Baldoni on the set of It Ends With Us. By this time, individuals at TAG, Ms. Nathan and Ms. Abel, were aware of the existence of HR complaints and sought clarity as to the specific HR complaints at issue in order to better counter them in the press. Yeah, if you're going to have effective public relations, the public relations needs to know what kind of things they're actually worried about coming out. Like I say to my clients, like I say about doctors, you need to be able to talk about your warts with the people that you're hiring to help you. If you don't, then they can't help you to the maximal extent. They should be able to. Approximately 1 minute later, more texts between these parties. Ms. Nathan and her team at TAG planted or otherwise were involved in generating or influencing the content publicly put forth on social media. On the same day, an article authored by Sarah Nathan titled "Blake Lively Approved Final Cut of It Ends With Us Amid Feud with Co-Star Director Justin Baldoni" was published on page 6, owned by the New York Post. The article addressed, among other topics, Ms. Lively's role in approving the final cut of the film, but emphasizes how Ms. Lively contributed to almost every aspect of the film, that her husband wrote one of the most important scenes in the movie, and that she was begged to remove one of her song choices from the film, despite Mr. Baldoni's ownership of the rights to the book via his production company, Wayfarer. The language contained in the article is almost a verbatim copy of the language exchange between Sarah Nathan and Ms. Abel via text and reflects multiple Ms. Abel's revisions to Sarah Nathan's original proposed draft. And see, Wayfarer owning the license to the book is also another aspect of the story, right? Say you can't put together a motive that's just Blake Lively and or Ryan Reynolds seeking creative control because they're egotists or narcissists, or that they just want to get in good with Sony. You can say maybe Blake Lively really connected with this book. Maybe she sought out getting a license for this particular book. Maybe she was unable to do so. At that point, Wayfarer says, we have the license. They cast Blake Lively, but Blake Lively always wants to make this movie herself. That's a different story, but it's still a story that can ascribe motivation to a potentially heightened or hyperbolized set of events. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about here. There's more, obviously, that is basically summarized by the New York Times article. This complaint link is in the New York Times article. It will also be in the description to the podcast because YouTube doesn't like links in the description to the videos. So in the best interest of saving everybody some time, we'll go straight to the exhibits here. So Exhibit A is that list that we saw earlier, or at least it's a version of it. The things that we think we need additional protection for: an intimacy coordinator, closed set, no spontaneous improvising, no physical touching without Blake Lively's approval, et cetera, et cetera. And then Exhibit B is the writer that they entered into, the actual contract. Reference is made to the earlier contract that was entered into for Blake Lively to be an actor in this movie. And then we add these provisions. And these provisions were designed to protect, including Provision 10, which we talked about earlier. There shall be no retaliation of any kind against Blake Lively, here artist, for raising concerns about the conduct described in this letter or for these requirements. Any changes in attitude, sarcasm, marginalization, or other negative behavior, including during publicity or promotional work, is retaliatory and unacceptable and will be met with immediate action. Now, honestly, as a lawyer, I don't love this language. Any changes in attitude, sarcasm, marginalization, or other negative behavior, that's way too broad for my liking. I would see that language probably be narrowed down to directly attributable to this situation or in the vein of retaliation. I don't even know what any change in sarcasm means as part of English language, but this was agreed to. So it's very broad in its language. And the concept here is that this all constitutes retaliation. You saw them highlight this particular provision. Now, that's not retaliation under California law. So the California Civil Rights Department isn't in the business of enforcing breaches of contract. So that's a different kind of story, but it's still a story that can add to the wrongful nature of what Baldani and Wayfarer is doing, at least in the eyes of the complainant here and in the eyes of California, or how they want California to see it. Then we have Exhibit C. You saw that they signed electronically. And this was the marketing plan. Positioning. Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni are starring in a film adaptation of Colleen Hoover's highest-selling novel. This is the first film of Colleen Hoover's phenomenon to be adapted for the big screen. Justin Baldoni is also directing and executive producing. Blake Lively is also producing as well as starring. Teen versions of Atlas and Lily are played by up-and-coming actors. Marketing points, right? These are the things that you should highlight when you're in an interview. Here's the summary of the book. What to avoid. Focus more on Lily's strength and resilience as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence. Empowerment is not just about standing up to adversity, but also about having the power to overcome within oneself and grow from it and developing agency to shape the future, right? And this is PR. This is internal PR. This is Sony, I think is described as Sony's marketing plan. But you can see that if you're holding to this and then you start getting pilloried for essentially being too positive or too frothy, out of touch, in the marketing campaign, you're not going to love the fact that you're following this contractual commitment that you've made and are getting in trouble for it. Ask any questions about the lack of diversity in the cast. See, this is what PR does, is they handle these things and they tell the artists and anyone else what to say in these circumstances. Scenario planning. I don't think there's anything else here. Providing quotes, how to market this thing. If then plan of action. If Blake and team push out a negative story regarding Justin Wayfarer post-premiere, we recommend planting a seed earlier on to position your truth narrative around the ordeal in a subtle way to avoid having to backtrack, get in front of it essentially. And again, these are all normal PR documents. They're framed here as subversive and negative, but they're all normal PR documents. And this is a complaint made to the state of California, once again, which is to say, when we look at this from a Hangouts and Headlines perspective, did the New York Times do their homework? Did they actually review whether or not these things were truthful? The state of California, its entire process is based around the concept that we get this complaint and then we evaluate the facts and decides whether to accept the case for investigation. If we accept, we independently investigate the facts and the legal issues. And sometimes we don't take it up because we don't think the legal issues are things that we can cover. But the New York Times is a journalism outlet, right? The premise is that they went out there and they read these things. They looked at them themselves as a part of reporting on this. You saw earlier on in the article, they said there were thousands of pages of texts. Her filing includes excerpts from thousands of pages of text, messages and emails that she obtained through a subpoena. These and other documents were reviewed by the New York Times. And this isn't great writing because these could refer to just a subpoena, could refer to just the filing, but it's implied by its reading and its context in terms of anybody that's actually reading what it is that they're reporting here. They reviewed the text messages and emails themselves. But if they didn't, and if the text messages were maybe not as presented in the complaint, because lawyers are out there hopefully not lying to state agencies, hopefully not lying to court systems, but maybe skewing things in a direction that is most advantageous towards their client, zealous advocacy, as we might say, that if you don't actually check on that work, then you might accidentally be printing things that are lies or untruths about someone. And as you know, that is a one-way ticket to a defamation lawsuit. Or in the next part of our video series, we'll discuss that it ends with us actor and director Justin Baldoni and his publicists sue the New York Times for libel. Now, I have issues with that particular suit. I think there are concerns about whether or not that is going to be a successful one, but it is important to note as part of this video series about this topic in particular, that there are two ways to look at this coin. There are two perspectives. Both are at least possibly valid in a way that I think reasonable people could come to an understanding of. And so I would ask everybody to once again, live reasonable minds can differ out there in the outrage minds, in social media, on Instagram, wherever else you find yourself, because this is not a story that ends solely with the New York Times article or even that complaint that we went over today. And that is what I wanted to talk to you all about today. Now, again, if you enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoy videos like this one, Hangouts and Headlines, Virtual Legality, or otherwise, please do consider supporting the channel through Player or Patreon, memberships, super chats, likes, upvotes, downvotes, whatever else you feel like doing on YouTube. Tell people that we're having these conversations. Tell people how awesome it was, or that you got to see this Hoeg guy just make a complete fool of himself, and link that video. I really appreciate all that support. Otherwise, just subscribing and telling your friends is all we really need. So, folks, it's been a pleasure being with you today in Hangouts and Headlines. I hope you found this informational. I hope you found this useful. Please do leave me with any comments or questions that you have here before we go out, and then I will close up this video. So Ms. VG3 says, can't wait for part 2. I would love to do part 2 immediately. I think I will probably have to recover a little bit from a video as long as this one. Still working on those energy levels, folks, but I appreciate everyone being here. Against the Tide says, I do not like how PR wanted to avoid domestic violence. Yep, I tend to agree. It's a bad marketing plan. But what Blake was discussing wasn't even about hope. It was about give me more money to buy my stuff. I do think that some of the criticism you see of Blake Lively and her appearances were essentially using her movie appearance to go and sell her other product lines in a way that some people found uncouth. And again, I'm in a poor position to judge these things because I'm not the target demographic or customer base for Blake Lively's booze or Blake Lively's hair care products or Ryan Reynolds anything. And so I'm the wrong person to give you an acknowledgement of why she was being so pilloried. And I certainly can agree that those things can be floated in strategic ways to get that snowball rolling in a way that is negative and is a smear campaign against someone like Blake Lively, because I'm very sympathetic to the fact that you go out there and do hundreds and hundreds of interviews that you're going to misspeak from time to time, right? I've been on YouTube now for 5+ years. I've said a lot of things. I've gotten in trouble for single sentences and 2-hour-long videos. And so I am sympathetic to that process and the trouble that people can find themselves in. Gwen says, great live, Hoeg. Thank you. I appreciate it. I really do. Beach says, we're still recovering from Runkle's stream. Yeah, he just was on last night, right? Allison says, Hoeg, you might find looking at spoon theory helpful. Believe me, my therapist has talked to me about my spoons. It really helped me understand about energy fatigue levels and managing. I've gotten pretty good at managing. I'm just unhappy with the level of spoons I have in my drawer. So I'm trying to go and gather more spoons because I'm unhappy with the current level. But I do agree management is super important. I've never had to deal with this in my life before this past year, really. And I'm getting there. I'm figuring out strategies. I'm figuring out ways to manage. But probably can't do the 2.5-hour plus video every day. And there is another big one coming in that part 2. There's a lot of legal documents to, again, get through because I do find this story fascinating. I think it's fascinating on so many different fronts because I do think those digital campaigns are out there. They're influencing people. The New York Times reporting on it, I don't think is a bad thing. I think the way they have reported on it and just kind of adopted this particular complaint as de facto truth is potentially problematic. And I want everybody to at least be reading it with open eyes when you see articles like that one. Beach says Runkles was 8 hours. Oh, I would die. I would die on stream. You would see me collapse on stream. It would be a wellness check to my front door because I would be just a collapsed body on screen well before 8 hours. Googleman81 says there is no spoon. Bald kid in the Matrix. Very true. But I can assure you that I have spoons. And while there is no spoon in the rest of my drawer, I would like to put some spoons there. Melly Bo Belly says, hi, super late to the show, but so happy to be here. Love you, Hoeg, and glad to have what time you can manage, mostly for H&H. Thank you, Melly. I really appreciate it. I really wanted to do this. I was excited about this one. I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to handle it because that complaint document is so long, but I think it went pretty well. And I apologize if some of the details, some of the granularity in the middle that you might want to have seen me address, I skipped over, but I just wasn't going to make it through that whole document, reading through it line by line. Beach says we did collapse in that 8 hours. I have no doubt. I might have put Runkle on to sleep, and that might have done well for his channel, but I don't know how they do it. I've wanted to be on with Ian and Rob when he's on from time to time, but it's so late in the night. Like that's almost past my bedtime when they start. And so I have not been able to get on there, but I'd like to do it more. And again, as I said earlier in this video, I really feel like this is Emily D. Baker's wheelhouse. And the celebrity scene, she has some of the best insights and best commentary. I love hearing from her on all this stuff. So please do check her out. I don't know if Alita's covered it at all on Legal Bites. I know she's been taking things a little bit slowly since the baby. So if she does handle it, I highly recommend checking out her comments as well. But I hope this was helpful to you all. And yes, we will cover the libel suit if I can get up to it in the near term. I'm trying to be reasonable about what I expect of myself in 2025. But I would like to do that part of the video as well. All right, folks. I think that's going to be it for right this second. But thank you so much for joining me in Hangouts and Headlines. And again, tell folks that we're here. I really appreciate all the support on Player, through Last Stand Media, through Patreon, through Super Chats, memberships, everything else. Nothing at all. Just being here. Love you all. Thank you so much. And I will see you on the next episode. Goodbye.
Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.